like to lift our heads and say, is it better to use postal codes, or could we assign a zone, or those sorts of things? So for future community surveys, we will be looking at that. And again, thank you for the public comments about that. And then lastly, we had a comment about electromagnetic radiation sensitivity. Would that be addressed in the presentation for the airport? And that is out of scope for the presentations you will receive tonight, but I thought that was worth mentioning for people. So again, lots of comments, lots of great input, and we'll get you a final report to be posted on the website that reflects some really good changes. So again, thank you to the public for those comments. Your Worship, sorry, abrupt ending there. With your permission, could I pass that off to the airport manager to introduce our consultant?
Mr. Goldfuss, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight we have with us Mr. Rob Bainan. Rob Bainan is with Operations Economics Incorporated. Rob was hired as the town's consultant to conduct a consultation plan for the Qualicum Beach Airport. Rob is with us tonight. I'd like to welcome. Rob will be presenting his final report this evening on the consultation plan. So, Rob, welcome.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here again. And yeah, I'm behind you. I know it's an unusual arrangement, but happy to be here. I was here in October last and at the open houses and presenting the final report. If I could ask a question to the chair, how we'll handle questions. Will we take questions during the presentation or at the end of the presentation?
I prefer at the end, okay. But if there's a specific area, we can take questions at that point.
Okay, thank you. So without more ado, I'll go through it. I think most of you were here in October. I'm a consultant. I'm based in Vancouver. I've worked on airport projects across Canada and internationally in the US. I have a fair bit of experience in this area, and every community is unique though, and this community is a unique community, and we'll speak directly to the aspects of it that study involved. Slide that's up right now, this is the consultation plan presentation, essentially the final presentation of the project. If we could go, thank you. So just the process and where we're at, there were 4 phases to this. It started with stakeholder consultations. There were 2 workshops held in July, meeting with airport users, and then with the group that the CAO was referring to, the broader kind of political and group in the area. Phase 2 was a council tour. Town council came to the airport. Kevin, the airport manager, and I walked around the airport. We did a site review looking at it and just talking about what's there and how it works. Phase 3 was public engagement. There was really 2 major aspects. There was a survey that was completed. The survey is in the back of the report. And there was 2 public meetings held in October as well. And finally, phase 4, I'm reporting, it's basically a summary report. It's very brief, speaking to what we looked at and what we found. And also a couple of appendixes speaking to the survey. One is looking at the results of the survey questions, and second is a very detailed report, which Liz Pollock pulled together, just all the comments that came out of the survey, and it's quite interesting if you want to flip through it. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the things I just wanted to talk briefly about, there's 2 major players here which have very complex roles, Transport Canada and NAV Canada. Transport Canada covers a lot, and I just bolded and italicized a couple of things from their website and what they do. It's responsible for transportation policies and programs, and that's everything that has national focus. Rail, marine transportation, aviation, and it is very difficult to pin it down, and that's been a discussion we've had at times. What does it actually do? It's a lot. If we have specific questions I can answer, we can speak to it, but it's broader than it's easy to grasp. The second piece is NAV Canada, and during the October workshops, the woman who is the manager for all the flight service stations in British Columbia outside of the Lower Mainland spoke to the group, gave some very interesting insights into how airspace in NAV Canada works in BC. And she made an emphasis just at the end there, again in bold and italicized, guide aircraft safely and efficiently through our airspace. That's the real focus, safety. So they have a lot of information, and they've offered additional information. We'll come to that later. But it's really a focus on safety is their number one job. Go to the next slide, please. Thanks. Just the site. I always like to have a look at the site itself. It's a single runway, a single parallel taxiway. There's an air terminal building, which is at the north side. You can see the large apron in front of it there. There's an orange block pointing to the air terminal building, search and rescue, cadets, and then there's a hangar row there. Many of them are privately owned with aircraft. When I flew in today, there was quite a few aircraft at the site too, which was interesting to see, more than I'd seen in the summer. So this is the site in the area we're talking to, and just for information purposes. Next slide, please. Thanks. A lot of discussion through this process about the noise abatement procedure, and just wanted to go over it again briefly. So the green arrow, aircraft arriving from Vancouver direction, they fly over the city, they cross over the midpoint of the runway. That's for safety reasons, to have a look at the runway, see the wind direction, see if there's anything on the runways or taxiways or aprons they should look at. Then they cross over, and then they curl around to either approach from the south or the north to land. And then the yellow lines show departures, the recommended departures under the noise abatement procedure. And there's just some points there. On departure, aircraft must fly out on the extended runway to 2 nautical miles or climb to 1,000 feet before turning north. Turns to the south are considered acceptable at any time when it is considered safe to do so. So in aviation circles, English measures are still used. So it is standard, and I'm sorry it's not metric, but that is the standard approach. Next slide, please. So over 2023, because most of what we're talking about is from 2023, this talks about what the town heard, and part of that was the project I'm involved in. Part of the things the town is doing that I collected information regarding. So there were 62 official noise complaints as of December 31st, 2023. There was interest in having a public forum to address noise events. Desire for public participation in the Airport Users Committee, concerns about the use of low lead 100 avgas at the airport, LL stands for low lead, and suggestions to amend the noise abatement procedure, NAP. Now, the town took a number of responses last year, even as this project was underway. This included a new dashboard on the town website to receive and track aviation events. And it's located right on the homepage. It's easily found. Town Council is reviewing its committee and commission structure, including the Airport Users Committee and how that works. Staff will continue to monitor new avgas fuel technologies, and certainly in the last month, Kevin's had discussions with a fuel manufacturer in the US about what is happening with the movement towards new fuels. Enhanced communications with the public in response to queries or concerns. So there's been a real effort to respond directly and appropriately here. Next slide, please. So what we heard, this refers to directly through the project. So my team and I, other people involved with the airport, made telephone calls, emails were sent and collected. There were the workshop meetings that are in July, the council tour, the airport survey, the public meetings, 2 public meetings in October. And then we've received the petition that was sent in and is now included in Appendix D as well. So thank you. Now, observations. These are my observations, and I just want to be clear, these reflect my views and is not necessarily officially the view of the town or something. But so airports are typically assessed on whether they are safe and secure, and this is really what Transport Canada does in its whole audit process. It's looking at, are you safe and secure? Qualicum Beach Airport is a safe and secure site. 2, the airport plays an active role in the Qualicum Beach community and supports local employment. 3, the airport plays a regional role as well, supporting emergency response and intercity transportation. An example of this is when the highway to Port Alberni was cut off this year, that the airport proved a linkage to Port Alberni. 4, the airport lacks a clear development plan, such as a master plan. 5, residents are impacted by aviation noise, as demonstrated by the 62 noise complaints in 2023. 6, Airport businesses and users commented that the airport does not receive the level of support and guidance it needs to be successful. So this came out of the workshops. Next slide, please. 7. I do just want to walk through these. I know it's a little tedious with word slides like this, but I just want to make sure I state them all. With its new airport event dashboard, Qualicum Beach is more responsive to airport-related complaints than most regional airports in Canada and is a leader in community airport responsiveness. And we can talk about that later, but I think it's taken a real leadership role here. 8, with its noise abatement procedure, the airport is a leader amongst small regional airports in BC. Few small regional airports have an NAP. 9, the airport's operational restrictions, such as requiring helicopters to obtain permission for training, are more restrictive than most small regional airports. And I'm working actively with Seashell on Oliver right now, and I'll be frank, their restrictions are significantly lower than the restrictions here. 10, if scheduled passenger air services are lost, it is unlikely that another carrier would provide these services in the current economic environment. And I'm talking post-COVID when I say that. Post-COVID, aviation's been hit very hard. A number of communities have lost air services. Some haven't seen them come back. Dawson Creek, for example, lost its air services at the end of COVID, and it has no scheduled air service at this point. There's a number of small communities in BC that have entirely lost services. 11, this is less acute, but the danger of losing services applies to other businesses at the airport, such as aircraft maintenance. If the airport loses its current aircraft maintenance provider, it may be difficult to attract a new service provider. There's been a lot of talk about medical system and how they're short of employees and labor. That's basically rippling through the entire economy. So just want to be aware of maintaining and keeping what you have. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. So just some recommendations. The first is formal recommendations requiring council decision-making. 1, the council receives the report titled Airport Consultation Plan Final Report, dated January 31st, 2024, provided by Operations Economics Incorporated, OEI. 2, the council directs staff to schedule an annual open house as a committee of the whole meeting for the public to have a regularly scheduled opportunity to provide input to council on airport-related matters. This is very similar to what Nanaimo Airport has. 3, the council directs staff to defer the strategic initiative of an airport master plan to 2025 within the 2024 to 2028 financial plan for reconsideration of the 2025 strategic planning process. So the formal recommendations, and I'll move on to some additional recommendations. These are more comments of myself. So airport planning would be beneficial to the airport to clarify how the town will respond to business opportunities, noise, environmental concerns, and land uses at the site. A master plan is recommended, and council will be considering this in its 2025 strategic planning. 2, NAD Canada, in the open houses, offered supplementary aircraft operations data for the airport. It is recommended that the town request this data and that it is added to the town's website, enhancing transparency in airport-related discussions. So if you were present, remember she put up a few diagrams of operations. She said that more data could be offered, but it has to be formally requested. 4, the airport should communicate that it is a leader amongst regional airports managing noise through its NAP, its operational procedures, and its online complaint forms. And that is my final report. And I thank you for your patience, and it's been a great pleasure working with the community, with council, and with staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Benen. Any questions from council to this to our presenter? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. Just through the chair, just looking at page 4 of our agenda where it goes over the sort of where the complaints came from. So one of the points was that there were 62 different complaints that were received. But I'm just wondering how many separate addresses there were, because the way I counted was 31, including the 13 unmentioned as all being separate addresses.
Mr. Benen, could everybody hear the question? Okay, go ahead.
I heard the question. I'm actually going to request if staff could respond to that, because I don't have it right in front of me at this moment.
Sure. Ms. Vrela.
So, Your Worship, I think I understood the question. If I have it wrong, please let me know. I'm just going to ask you to turn off your microphone, Your Worship. sorry.
It is on page 4 of our agenda, not the report that we just saw.
Yes, so if we go through that table, there was a single address on View Road that submitted 11 complaints. So that would be 11 of the 62. Single address on Hodges Road that submitted 12 complaints. And then the table progresses from there down to, there were 13 individual unidentified addresses provided. So of the 62, there weren't 62 individual complaints. There were multiple complaints from the same address, if that helps.
That was your question? Anyone else from council have a question? So at this, go ahead, Mr. Council. And after council has asked the questions, I'll turn it over to you. And then if you just state your name, you don't have to state your address, but just your name, and come up to the microphone. There's a button at the base, so the light from red goes green. And then just ask your question, and we'll try and deal with it best we can. Thank you. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. My question is on page 6 or page 5 of our agenda, on the first paragraph. Staff are also in the process of investigating what other airports are doing to mitigate disturbances such as noise over populated areas. And that council will be presented with this information when it is available. Do you have a sense of when that is available? Should I just ask one question at a time? I have several.
I think that's good. Have one at a time. Ms. Rella.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The airport manager might want to add to my comment, but I think one of the things that we're looking at is perhaps a good neighbor policy, working with the flight school, some things like that. So again, I think there's some less structured approaches that staff are currently investigating. And again, we can report back to council and the public, perhaps at that open house, if it's scheduled perhaps June or something like that. So again, it's an ongoing dialogue about an active airport, and I think we're just staying live to opportunities.
Thank you. Mr. Goldfuss, any comment on that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that is correct. So we we've been in discussions with the flight school, the Qualicum Beach Flying Club, Ishkuio Air has sent helicopters. And the focus of the discussion is to bring to their attention some of the challenges that the community and the airport are facing around noise, for an example. The discussions have been very positive to date. The pilots and the associations that I've just spoke about, they're very appreciative of the discussions that we are having. Some of the things that staff is looking at in addition to that is good neighbor programs, such as Pitt Meadows, for an example. It appears that they have an excellent program in place, and we'll be further investigating these programs, and we'll be able to report back to council shortly with what our recommendations will be moving forward with those initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I'm curious as to what the difference is between why a pilot would choose north and south, and do they have that choice, or can they be requested or enforced to take the south route to avoid populated areas, or is that not something that is possible?
Thank you. Mr. Goldfuss?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Van der Valk. Can it be enforced? The question is no. So when a pilot is on a runway, there's many contributing factors such as weather, winds, air traffic. Those are decisions that a pilot must make upon departure in this case. So they will choose, based on wind direction, for an example, whether to go off runway 29, which will take them to the west, or off of 11, which will take them to the east. So if I was to use the west as an example, that decision has been made. The pilot will take off heading west. Now, If they plan on taking a southerly direction, they can, as the noise abatement procedure shows, that they can make that decision to turn south, which would be a left-hand turn at that point when safe to do so. Your noise abatement procedure, on the other hand, is very specific. And why it is specific is because it is a noise abatement procedure. It's in place to mitigate noise. It's not in place to eliminate noise, okay? And I think that's important to understand. So if a pilot chooses to leave the airport heading west and chooses to take a north turn, then as by the noise abatement procedure, that is a regulatory procedure, and they must go 2 nautical miles off center of runway and or 1,000 feet elevation or greater before they can make that north turn.
Go ahead.
Thank you. May I continue on, or do you want to? Okay. There was a question that I had regarding, you had some figures about how many flights, how many people Isku Airlines transported, which was 3,600. This is on page 11 of our agenda. And yet 15,000 to 18,000 aircraft movements. Could you clarify for me where that difference in numbers is? Because it's quite considerable.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Goldfuss.
So we are a certified airport, but we have no way of tracking private pilot aircraft movement. So the 15 to 18,000 is an estimate. So the figure that you're seeing in front of you, for an example, from Ishkueo Air, that is an exact figure because they record the number of flights throughout the year that they take. And that's the difference. So again, the 15 to 18,000 aircraft movements, that is, that's an estimate. And we feel that's a pretty good estimate.
Can I make I'd just like to add a note to that, is that every arrival and departure, is a movement, so return flights, you divide that by 2.
I have so many questions. Why don't we let someone else ask a question, and if you could come back to me, I'll see which ones are.
Nice segue.
Thank you.
Councillor Skipsey.
I have a number of questions too. I think I'll try to limit it to 4 right now. So in reading the material, I'm thinking that it's probably not frequently enough for council to receive the complaints, the number of complaints on an annual basis. And a number of other departments report to council monthly on a variety of different statistics, like the fire department or the building permits, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering whether it would be possible if council could receive perhaps a short report from the airport on the number of complaints received, maybe the number of, I don't know, training hours, if there's helicopter training happening, that kind of thing on an ongoing basis rather than waiting till the end of a year.
Similar to the fire department report. Mr. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So absolutely, we can. I'd like to see that kind of reporting for all of the departments. It's very administratively heavy, certainly the level of detail that is provided. So perhaps we could work with council to see what would serve you best if we could move that to every 2 months or something like that. That is a discussion point that I had to come back to council seeking that direction. But certainly more reporting can come out of the airport on a regular basis, and we can talk to council about what your needs are.
I think that's a reasonable suggestion, actually. Go ahead.
Okay, the second question I had was when the the idea of having a report was originally envisioned, there was a section that would be on revenue opportunities. And I just wondered whether there's more information that council could obtain about whether adding a fuel surcharge is allowable or advisable. And I know that has been raised a number of times when we've talked about the airport. And also whether it would be appropriate to find out or to ask users to pay an airport improvement fee, as is done in other larger airports. So that would be directly from the passengers.
All right, I think we'll let staff mull that over and provide a response in the report, but if you'd like to have a response now, you go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So certainly council can have more information on revenue opportunities. I think that was one of the reasons we requested an airport master plan, because that would have really given us the opportunity to dig more into that. We weren't successful in the grant application, so we have moved that to 2025 as we discussed at strategic planning. So there may be something on a smaller scale that we could consider. And then certainly there is a tax that carriers provide per passenger, and perhaps I could defer to the airport manager on that piece.
Thank you, Your Worship. The airport already does, as part of your bylaw, collect airport improvement fees from the commercial carriers. So, for an example, Ishkuio Air is our commercial airport air carrier, and per person, it's an $11 fee. That's a one-time fee if you're on a return flight, and if it's collected the other way, just coming back on a ticket as well. So we already do collect those fees, and they are called AIF fees.
Thank you.
Okay, so another thing is around, I guess, some of the decision-making and policy area, and whether or not council has the authority to set a policy or limits for, let's say, the flight school as to how many circuits can be made in one day, or for capping helicopter training as to what we think is a reasonable amount, like in a day or a week or a month.
Thank you. Mr. Goldfuss.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Skipsey. I believe we can, but staff would need to look into that a little further and just see what, if any, legalities are involved with that. We certainly would want to provide the correct information to council and report back on that.
Thank you. And to match that with an earlier question from Councillor Vandervalk, when the flight school comes in, from what I've seen and heard, they make their circuit, they land, but they don't really stop. They take off and they make that same circle, and it happens numerous times in an hour or a couple of hours. It's very annoying. So could they not be asked or said, if you want to keep doing this, you're going to have to, when you take off to the west, you're going to have to turn left if you want to make that circuit, because going to the right and continuously flying over the same populated area is just not fair, and it's not, in my opinion, like Pitt Meadows, to have it neighborly. And I think we have to stress the word neighborly. They are our neighbors, and we all live on this together. So I thought if that was something that could be taken up with the instructor and say, you're going to have to teach them to make left turns. Anyway, it's just one thought that came out of some of the questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can report that most maneuvers are to the south. They do left-hand circuits. And the reason for that, if you look at a motor vehicle, for an example, the steering wheel is on the left-hand side, similar to an aircraft. So that typically is the route that a pilot will take, and they do left-hand circuits for that reason. If they take, and they do from time to time, again, depending on the weather conditions and what maybe they're up against, from time to time, they may do a right-hand circuit, but doing a right-hand circuit, they have to reach far over to look, so it's much better if they do a left-hand circuit, because they're right there when they make that maneuver. They're looking down at the ground, for an example. Our experience is that most aircraft leaving the airport are doing left-hand maneuvers, right, when they're safe to do so. And most aircraft actually are making left-hand turns east of Village Way and east of the railway tracks, okay? And this, again, is some of the discussions that we're currently having with our stakeholders at the airport.
Thank you. One more?
Well, one, but I'm going to sneak in an extra one. I guess, is it possible for the town to have access to information as to where the users are coming from, like as far as municipal address? I just think it might be able to give us more credibility if we were to try to get some regional support or funding.
Thank you. Do we get the information about where people actually come from, either that have a hangar or come or arrive or leave from another area outside of Qualicum Beach?
So just for clarity, Your Worship, would that be like the pilots where they're coming from?
Or the passengers that are using our commercials or scheduled flights.
So the passengers for the commercial flights, that, yes, because they're registered, it would be difficult for private pilots for us to collect that information. We could look at, however, we could do some research and see if other airports are doing a similar, thing as you've suggested. It may be challenging, but it's certainly something that we could investigate and report back on.
Yeah, because when we talk about a swimming pool, we're now going user pay. So staff at the swimming pool asks people, I don't know how accurate that is, because I know people think they're in Qualicum Beach because they have a postal code or a phone number that appears to be Qualicum Beach, but they're not. And if you're a property owner, you know where your taxes are going, but if you're a tenant, you may not know what the property tax is sent to, and there may be a lot of confusion about where it is. But that's the kind of the initiative. If we could go to the regional district or at least the Oceanside area and show to the other areas around us that they benefit, their residents benefit from having an airport, and perhaps, as Councillor Skipsey suggested, they should contribute to some of the costs that we take on as a result of the airport. So that's the reason why, if we could find that out, that would help us, at least if we did a sample. Thank you. Councillor Skipsey, one more?
Yeah, the last one's a quick one, I think. It was talked about that we could request additional supplementary aircraft or information from NAVCAN, and I just wondered if that would require a resolution of council or whether staff can do that without direction.
Mr. Goldfuss?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Skipsey. No, it doesn't require council direction. That would be an operational matter.
So we have Councillor Young and then Councillor Harrison. Go ahead.
Well, there's been some great questions and answers already. So, but I would like to ask, instead of the annual meeting of the Committee of the Whole, the open house, at least having it twice a year would be maybe more ideal than having it all kind of saved up for 1 year to hear all the complaints. My other thing was, how much is this costing? Like, is there a way that we can do something like this without, I think the cost is around $70,000 for this whole report. I'm not sure.
Ms. Varela?
No, I believe there's confusion with what an airport master plan would have been. So again, open houses are an effort that council decides you're receiving good value for, and staff support that. The public give of their valuable time as well. So staff serves at the pleasure of council, and we'd take direction on the number of opportunities you'd like to have.
Oh, sorry. It is regarding this whole project, this whole report. Is this like a $70,000 cost? Is this part of the master plan?
No, Your Worship. I don't have the exact budget figures, excuse me, at my fingertips. But no, the $70,000 was relating to the master plan, this initial first phase, which was your common knowledge base. A lot of the stuff staff have achieved off the side of their desk. I'd hate to quote the number off the top of my head, as this was a 2023 initiative, but significantly less. I can get you that information offside, and I'll provide that to all of council.
And thank you for that comment about having a common base of information. I think this report provides that. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, thanks. So just to follow up on a couple of things. One, I think an annual report is actually fine. If you look at the number of individual addresses, it's 31. If you look at the total number of complaints, it's 62. And assuming that all 13 I addressed are separate individuals, I mean, that's an assumption on my part. I'm just trying to be as generous as I can. That's roughly the same number per month. You know, it's about 4 a month or so. It's roughly the same number we get for like dog off leash in our bylaw report. So we don't have a townhouse twice a year on dogs being off leash, right? I think when we're looking at this, there's a limited amount of time that staff have, and a lot of these issues are going to be the same 6 months from now as they are today. So I don't think we'd be getting good value doing it quarterly or biannually for these town hall meetings. Having more frequent reporting, that's one thing. You can do that as like a line item, but I think these whole meetings are a lot more time than putting together a few numbers in a report. Just one question through the chair to, I'm not sure if it would be Mr. Goldfuss or the consultant, but ballpark figure, I know we don't have the exact numbers, what percentage of the aircraft that we see flying over town in the middle of summer, what percentage of those aircraft ballpark would originate from the town? Which percentage would just be from all the other airports in the region?
Mr. Goldfuss?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Harrison. I'm not quite sure. Again, it's hard to quantify that, but the majority of aircraft in this region, specifically Qualicum Beach, is local aircraft. We do get visitors from the coast, some from the United States that will stop, fuel, and enjoy a lunch at the restaurant before heading to Alaska, things like that. But the majority of your aircraft is local.
And just for clarity, I didn't mean the folks at the airport. I meant the traffic over top of the town. So for when people are looking at the noise that's being generated, how much is from the town, and then how much would be from other airports in terms of people flying over the town as part of just their flight path?
Thank you for the clarity. I wouldn't be able to provide a number on that. We have no air traffic control or anything at Qualicum Beach, so we wouldn't be able to even estimate a number like that.
Okay, fair enough. And then just another part in the report, it mentioned alternatives to leaded gasoline. So currently that's something that's allowed in Canada. There is some discussion in the States about moving away from that. I'm just wondering where things are at. I know a couple things were sort of mentioned as a hypothetical, but my understanding is that presently there's no like Health Canada approved alternative for the leaded gasoline for the small aircraft. Is that correct?
So as the airport manager, I've been in discussions with some American company, Swift Fuels out of Indiana. They're based out of Indiana. They're quite a large petroleum company, and for a number of years they've been developing alternative fuels to LL100. They have a fuel that has been developed. It's called UL94. And the number, just for reference, the number is the level of octane. So UL94 is unleaded fuel. The FAA on some airframes, from what I understand in the United States, has approved approximately up to 500 airframes in the United States for the use of this fuel. Keeping in mind that there's well over 1,500 certified airframes that we're speaking about that require LL100. From what I understand in discussions, and I've had some feedback from their CEO just recently, is that the FAA is working with Transport Canada as we speak, and has been for some time on these fuel initiatives. At this point in time, staff has no further information, but we will diligently be on top of this and seeing where our country, Transport Canada, is with these initiatives. I'd like to also add that Swift Fuels, in their development of fuels, they're actually developing a fuel called 100R, which will actually supersede UL94. And again, it's a higher octane. 100 is the octane level. And again, in those discussions, they feel that they might have some certification from the FAA this year on the 100R. And if they do, that will supersede, like I say, the UL94 in the United States. So bilaterally, as I say, they are having discussions bilaterally with Transport Canada, the FAA is, and once we get more information, we'll be in a position to report back.
Thanks. And just to clarify, basically then what we're saying is that's a federal jurisdiction in terms of approving the fuels. So if folks really want to see a change in some of the federal regulations, obviously we don't tell the federal government what to do at the local level. That's kind of not really our lane. But we do have an MP who's very active, and if folks want to reach out to him. And just the last thing too is I'd be very cautious if we're looking at changing the cost for commercial carriers. Right now is not a great time for the airline industry. It's not been with COVID and the pandemic, it was actually a pretty big hit for a lot of airlines across North America. And I think that if we want to increase revenue, it's going to come down to essentially having more business activity at the airport, whether it's directly, well, it has to be airport related because the province doesn't give us a choice on that because of the land grant. It has to be for airport use, quote unquote. But if we want to increase the revenue, we either get more business activity at the airport or we try to convince the RDN to chip in. But those are really the two things. It's very common from what I've read about other local governments to lose money at a small local airport. It's kind of the standard practice is that you're not making money or even breaking even. You're usually losing money in small communities. And it's only the largest airports where they have Vancouver International and Victoria where you actually make money because of the huge amount of businesses that are located there and all the leases generates enough revenue to basically make it profitable. So when people say, you know, why are we losing money? Well, every small town is losing money at their airport. I'm not aware of anyone that's profitable. So just for something for clarity, for perspective when we're talking about that.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the gallery. Sorry? Oh, did I forget you?
No, you were going to come back to me.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. There have been some concerns about training, particularly about helicopter training. And I know a lot of people appreciate the fact that we have medevac and we have emergency services. I think the complaints are more along the lines of, do we need to be the main training center? Do we get any revenue from training is one of my questions. And also with Ascent Helicopter now having a fairly large contract with the province, an enlarged contract, will this mean that there is going to be more training through Qualicum Beach Airport?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Goldfuss.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Vanderbroek. I would say that we're not the main training area, Qualicum Beach, for helicopter activity. A lot of this helicopter training is done off-site. However, we do have helicopter training. For an example, in 2023, I authorized 14 requests for helicopter training. Most of that was with Ascent Helicopters for medevac rescue purposes, and it equated to a total of 27 hours for the total year, 27 hours of helicopter training. I don't believe with Ascent's helicopters, actually, you know, with their contract with the provincial government, that there's going to be an increase. You know, as I said, the majority of helicopter training to this point is been done off-site. But they do need to come into what they call a controlled site, and a controlled site is the aerodrome, the airport. And what that means is it's airside is a fenced area so that they have a surety that, you know, there's no wildlife, there's no people that can get into these areas, because a lot of this training is done at the runway level or at the field level and not necessarily at a higher elevation. A lot of this is hovering over and doing certain maneuvers that they must do when they rescue people. For an example, You know, they will go up to Mount Arrowsmith, for an example, with a helicopter, and they will put one strut, if you will, on the edge of a cliff, and they will hover there because those are some of the maneuvers that they have to do when they're rescuing people. So a lot of those maneuvers, like I say, are done at a lower level, and when they're done like that, they have to be in a controlled site. You know, they can't just go to a gravel pit, for an example, and do a lot of those. But as I've mentioned, the majority of this is done off-site.
The other question was, the other part of the question was the revenue. Do we get paid by these organizations that need that training?
Thank you, Your Worship. Currently, no. But again, council could look at that as part of an amendment to their bylaw.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe this is my last question, but it's regarding the gas again. We have just had a new gas or Jet A tank put in, I believe. That's the Jet A. Is there a problem? Can all airplanes use the lower lead gas, or do some, because they're older, have to use a more highly leaded gas? In other words, could we just sell LL100 or a lower lead content gas?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Vanderbuck. So most of the aircraft that is using, the majority of the aircraft that is using LL100, for an example, it's old technology. These aircrafts are 50 and 60 years old. They're high compression piston driven engines, and they rely on LL100, for an example. And the lead contact, there's a couple of things. It works as a lubricant. It works as a fuel stabilizer at a certain altitude as well. So these, you know, when these aircraft were manufactured and certified, they are certified to run on this particular fuel. It's quite a process to change this, and this is what I've mentioned is that the FAA is currently going through. They do extensive engine studies, and they put these engines through extreme events running these new fuels to ensure that they are compatible, so to speak. So you are correct. Last year, we completed the Jet A fuel system. Jet A is a totally different fuel. That's a kerosene-based fuel for with a different octane, and different engines must run on that. LL100 is an aviation gasoline, and it is a totally different fuel as well for different aircraft. It's kind of like if you looked at diesel and gasoline. They're two different types of fuels.
Thank you. I obviously don't know much about airplanes and their fuel. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, we're all learning. So with this, I'm going to ask folks in the gallery, and we'll just go first come, first serve. There's a hand up there and then a hand up there. But I have a request. This is something that I have to insist on for your and everybody else's benefit, that this is a respectful workplace, that we are respectful to each other, to staff, and that everybody feels comfortable and confident that they will be heard, and nobody's going to either cheer or applaud or make them feel uncomfortable when they get to the podium. So thank you with that. Go ahead, just to state your name and your question. Thank you, or comment.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you all for your service. I appreciate what you're doing and giving us the chance to talk. Really quickly, I just want to speak to Councillor Harrison's question about the 62 complaints in 2023. Those complaints only started after our last open meeting in November, early November, where we were asked to use the complaint system on the dashboard of the website that was just created. And it took some of us a little while to figure it out. So that was a week into, halfway through November, I started using that. And I think I made 7 of those were mine. But we're really looking at a period of 6 weeks. And so I think if we had a whole year of complaints, it'd be well into the hundreds, maybe even more. So a lot of people don't know how to use that dashboard yet. It took me a while to figure it out. And just speaking to that complaints process as well, I received a very nice response each time that one of my complaints were one day it was 40 some passes over my house, and between this time and this time, short period of about 6 hours. Another day was 50 passes over and around, noisy passes, this repetitive thing. And the answers were always that no rules were violated. So that's the issue. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. This lady up front here. Oh, we have I'm going to ask you to wait a moment. We're going to have a response to that comment. So thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Ella.
Sorry, Your Worship. I just think it's important for the public to understand. Well, the new noise complaint process, which again was about increased responsiveness, transparency, all those things, was put in place in November. We actually tracked all of the complaints that we received throughout the year through the airport. It's just the new system. So the 62 is for all of 2023, the noise complaints that were received about specific aircraft. Again, not including the petition, which had more general concerns, but 62 specific complaints in 2023, not just in the last 2 months. So just a point of clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Yes, ma'am. No, I think this lady had her hand up before you, Carol, this time. And then you go next.
Go ahead. Sure.
Yeah.
Is this working?
Carol,
Okay.
you're next, and then the fellow by the door. Thank you. And then
Hi.
you're next.
So my name is Sylvia Isaacson. I live here in Qualicum Beach, and this is the first time I've ever heard that there was somewhere I could go to complain. Because as I'm outside quite a bit, I'm starting a farm on 6 acres. I'm really excited about it. So I'm out there doing stuff to the land, and planes are going by all the time. And I do happen to have a health studies certificate from Simon Fraser University. And I know we're talking about low levels of lead. However, when they're repeated over and over, flying over my trees, flying over your lettuce that's going to be at the market, has anybody studied that effect? Has anybody looked at the long-term effect of low levels of lead to my granddaughter who will be visiting and picking berries with me? So, yeah, it's annoying to hear them, but it's more annoying to know that I probably won't, based on statistics, have the same life expectancy if low levels of lead affect my health. And I'm 57. I wouldn't mind living till 90, but I'm not sure. So every time a plane goes by, that creates that uncertainty for me. And also, one last thing, it seems to me like a flight school, it's a great idea. I actually lived in Pitt Meadows before living here. I never heard one plane. But is it really worth 10,000 people's peace and joy of living for one flight school that we're making how much money from? So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Very good. Yes, Carol, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm very thankful that you're here and giving us this audience to be able to speak from the Qualicum Woods area. So I'd like to ask a couple of questions of Mr. Banyan. This chart does
Please,
not reflect
Blair,
correctly
Ms. Dow,
the...
Ms. Dow, please direct your question to the chair.
Yes.
Thank you.
But it's his report
Yes,
to
but
us.
you direct your question and your comments to the chair.
And this report says there are 62 complaints. So my question is, if we have a petition that is worded by 82 people on this petition, that are saying, we, the undersigned, are in the flight path of the Qualicum Beach Airport and experiencing increased noise from low-flying airplanes, warm-up, takeoff, and landing. Flight plan changed in 2015, and planes fly directly over Qualicum Woods, creating higher than normal decibel noise levels. Please change it back to the original plan. We have concerns about the safety over some 500 homes, and it changed our quality of life. We need representation from the Qualicum Woods to the Airport Committee. So I must say that in addition to this petition, we are very thankful to be able to have this ability to talk to you. And this was done in November 7th. So I would say that these people are certainly should be added to the 62 complaints that came in on the electronic reporting. I'm not very good at techie things. I just have to tell you, I lean to my dear husband, Fred, for all of that. The other was another petition, which I showed to Mr. Benyon. He took his camera and took a picture of this petition, and this was back in 2016, but not much has changed. The planes started to continue flying even more from that period, and these numbers of 120-some people should be added in as complaints as well, so that this pie would look a lot different if we had the total figures in, which represents some 200 people, just in that group alone. To add to that, I just have an email here from one of our people that was not able to be here and asked if I would read this out. His name is Terrence Tobin. He lives in Qualicum Woods. He says here, what the consultant describes is not responsiveness, quote. Having an online forum does not mean that the council is actually responding to complaints by improving the situation. They are only enabling electronic complaint gathering. The airport should communicate that it is a leader amongst regional airports managing noise through its NAP, its operational procedures, and its online complaints form. This is a huge assumption, not a fact. By the way, this has been sent in an email to all of you. Those of us who feel that airport-related noise is a problem do not feel that the current noise abatement plan is effective in managing it, either because the rules are not adequate and/or that pilots are not consistently following them. Therefore, though the Qualicum Beach Airport may be unique in having an NAP, the airport can only prove it is a leader if the ultimate goal is addressing residents' noise concerns has been met more effectively than other similar regional airports. The situation at other airports is not discussed at all in this report, so there's no evidence that Qualicum Beach Airport is doing any better in this regard. So this gentleman is explaining to us the importance of the communication on the website, which has been brought forward by one of our other residents here. And this was said to us by many people. These are older folks that are living in Qualicum Woods. A lot of them don't use the computer to report. So I just feel it's really important to get an accurate picture of the numbers of people that are concerned. There are people with health issues, people recovering from surgeries, that sort of thing. There's been so much overhead noise. We need to think about the lifestyle of our people in the neighborhood. I would like to say I had a nice talk with Lou about the fact that Qualicum Woods was not listed in this graph. It says ocean side of railway and Courtney side of Memorial 10%. Is that the one you were talking about? That you were going to amend and put the Qualicum Woods notification in there. You see, what's really confusing to me and all of us is Chartwell is given a big heading, Eagle Crest is given a big heading. Why is Qualicum Woods not given a heading? Can somebody just kind of...
Yes, we can explain that. And your question regarding the petition, I think we also have a response for that. I think council got even the one from 2016, was it? So council has received the petitions, and regarding the geographic areas and community neighborhoods, Ms. Varela has a comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I'll do is I'll read the email that was part of my response today. So As I mentioned earlier, I agree it's confusing. This is a practice that has been used in many community surveys, so that's what staff informed me because I found it confusing as well. So what we said was the purposes of assigning geographic locations to survey data is primarily to identify the general vicinity within which people associate themselves. This methodology is not intended to diminish the unique identity or concerns of individual neighborhoods, including Qualicum Woods. This methodology reflects how the survey was created and the data was collected. And I referred to multiple surveys have used that same nomenclature, if you will. Staff have advised me that this has been the consistent practice for town surveys, and I think it's worth reconsidering the approach as the mix of neighborhood and geographic descriptions aren't easily understandable. I agree with that. We'll look for ways to improve this. For example, in future surveys could use defined quadrants or postal codes or things like that. So I think it's that idea of we're looking to continued improvement, but the table and the way the data was collected wasn't meant to exclude a specific neighborhood. All of that input is important. And I think when we talk about the 62 complaints, Your Worship, it's important to remember that those are 62 complaints about specific noise complaints. And I think when we talk about the general concerns about the airport, that's why we included the petition, which is a more general concern about the airport, not specific about an aircraft and a noise complaint. It's a general noise concern. We've included it as a new Appendix D. We didn't include the 2016 petition, as we feel that could be dated. But again, if council directed us to include that, we could, and we have provided it to each of the councillors, both electronically and hard copies. So I think we've tried to do very well. And again, we're not perfect, but we're certainly with an eye to improvements ongoing. And I think that's great. Staff should be commended.
Thank you.
I can't tell.
Thank you for drawing our attention to the geographical areas as
Yeah.
opposed to neighborhoods. So that will be changed?
Yes.
Because that makes it consistent?
Yes.
with
Could
all
I
the
just
other surveys.
respond, just to,
Sure.
in addition to what you said? You did not include the 124 in this petition because it made no reference to the flying low. It's right here on the petition. It says, we have issues with safety and noticeability, increased noise from the low-flying airplanes. That should be in with a complaint. That's over 120 people here. These are residents right in the flight path.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, staff serve at the pleasure of council, and if council chose to direct us to amend the report to reflect that, we would take that instruction. We do feel it's fairly represented as it is, but again, if council wants that information in a different way, we would welcome that instruction, and this certainly wasn't meant to downplay any of the concerns that are represented on that petition. We take that very seriously, and I think the play that it has been given both in the report, the PowerPoint presentation, and the general discussion reflects that.
Thank you.
Much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. And I hope that you will consider all these 200 signatures as being complaints that are part of the numbers, the total numbers for Qualicum Woods. Thank you.
Yes, we heard that loud and clear, no pun intended. The fellow by the door. Can we go through this? Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Your Worship. My name is Sigmund Sort. I'm a longtime user and tenant at Qualicum Beach Airport. I fly for the Royal Canadian Air Force presently, flight safety officer, crash investigator. I fly Hope Air medical missions out of Qualicum Airport. It's a volunteer effort to take people in medical need to their medical appointments when they have no other means of doing so. I have been a flight instructor militarily and civilian and an airline training captain for many decades. And I can assure you, and I want to put the people in this room particularly at ease, knowing that the vast majority of pilots, full stop, wherever they're from, are highly courteous, highly disciplined, rule-oriented, law-abiding citizens who have lives in their hands, including their own. When we fly noise abatement procedures, we do so when it is safe for our aircraft and the people that are on it. We don't lightly deviate from a noise abatement procedure. We only do so if we have to. Ingress and egress, that is departures and arrivals from Qualicum Airport, are sometimes in the hands of NAV Canada, as we've heard Mr. Goldfuss stipulate. If you're doing a standard instrument departure or approach, you have to conform to the headings and altitude set for those departures and arrivals. Anecdotally, there are a huge number of aircraft that transit Qualicum Beach Airport that don't even land there, but do overfly noise-sensitive citizens. At Comox Air Force Base, we have a big aerial photograph of where noise-sensitive citizens are located by little pins. And the Air Force commander dictates that we shall deviate around those noise-sensitive citizens. We don't have to know who they are, but using that aerial photograph, we're able to see as military pilots where those sensitive citizens are, and we do our level best to give them a peaceful day. But an airport is an airport, and the airport's been here a long, long time. My wife has a law practice that deals heavily in transactions of real estate. And properties near airports have on their land of title, statement of title, the fact that you're buying a piece of property or you own a piece of property that's in proximity to an airport. And it should be reasonable for you to expect to hear aircraft noise. I just want to clarify the runway 2911 procedures. It's a left-hand circuit when you're departing runway 29, and it's a right-hand circuit when you're departing runway 11. So you turn south off runway 11, and by and large, everybody conforms to that. There may be an operational requirement that has you deviate from that, but it's extremely rare. The 100 low lead, that's already been a lowering of lead content a long time ago to try and address lead concerns. And yes, the FAA and Transport Canada are working hard to try and find an alternate fuel, but until that happens, we sort of have to put up with it. And I don't know how much lead is on our streets and at our gas stations, but you can buy 97 octane downtown Qualicum anytime you want. So if you're concerned about lead flying over, you might be concerned about lead driving by your house. And I'd also like to clarify that the Jet A fuel is for turbine aircraft engines. So typically helicopters today, most of them are turbine engines, and larger passenger aircraft use Jet A. But most small planes, including the current passenger service, relies on the 100 low lead fuel. Over the years, again anecdotally and in closing, Your Worship, the communication between the Qualicum Flying Club, I'm also the chairperson, director, for the Canadian Owner Pilots Association for British Columbia and Yukon, and I sit on a national board. And I have to stress that Qualicum Airport is the only known airport in Canada to restrict its use to 66% of its time. It's the only airport known in Canada to not be allowed to fly between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., including commercial aircraft. So while I catch my flight out of Comox or Nanaimo at 5:30 in the morning, I can't do that, even if I wanted to commercially out of Qualicum. It's an incredible restriction on all operators, not known to exist anywhere else in Canada. That's a huge hit. And if I want to be selfish for a moment, if I want to go to Vancouver in my personal aircraft and come back, I have to land by 10 p.m. or land at Nanaimo, arrange for transportation to come home, arrange for transportation to go to Nanaimo the next day and get my airplane and then fly home. And do I do that? Yes, I do. And in over 20 years, almost 30 years of flying, the town of Qualicum has given me permission once to land after 10 p.m., and it was for an emergency health matter in the family, and I appreciate that one let, because I think in part when we lost a flying comrade in the Royal Canadian Air Force, I was not allowed to go to the funeral and come home after 10 p.m. I was denied that observation of that life passing in the Royal Canadian Air Force. That hit hard. So the town plays pretty good hardball when it comes to do you get to use the airport or not. Lastly, in terms of flying schools and in flight instruction, that's a Canadian Air Regulation matter. When we train pilots and they're learning how to take off and land, it requires circuits, and time on task is the best teacher. So yes, sometimes they might do 7, 8 circuits in an hour or so, and that's going to be on the south side of the airfield. There's no getting around that. If you want pilots to fly machines in the future, you want to be medevaced out of your community, or you want to have a pilot that's on the Air Force role defending your country, or an air ambulance, whatever it is, they got to come from somewhere. And the town of Qualicum Beach has been an exemplary administrative team over the years, despite only allowing us to use the airport 66% of the day rather than 100% of the day like every other airport in Canada. I commend Kevin Goldfuss and his team. I commend the consultative process, and I'd like to remind Town Council that as Canadian Air Pilots Association, an Air Force pilot, and airline pilot, if you want a voice at the table as an advisory voice, give me a call. I'll come and help you talk about things and tell you what gas goes where and what can be done and not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sigmund. Councillor Harrison, is it okay if I had 2 hands up before I come back to you? Okay, there is this gentleman here. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, good evening. My name is Didier Simulhan, and I'm the resident. I take responsibility for the complaints on View Road. And the reason why I do that is because I live 500 meters from the airport, and I have helicopters doing donuts over my house for way more than what was suggested in the number of the information provided today. For example, we understand that there's been 14 instances where the training has been approved. I note that that is deceiving. It's plainly deceiving. The reason being is because each one of those 14 are good for 5 days. So when you add that all up, or thereabouts, depending, but in majority. So when you add that up, that's 70 calendar days out of 365. So basically, I'm on notice for 20% of the time that this could happen. It will happen, and it can occur at any time during that timeline. So I have a hard time conducting my business from my home. As I noted in October, I've been working from home, and I attend a lot of meetings as a consequence of working from home, and I find it being compromised in terms of concentration because of the noise of the helicopter going over my house, recorded at 82 decibels. That's 82 decibels. And there's lots of studies out there that captures the impacts of consistent noise over hours at a time, and what the effect that is on you. So, on an individual rather. The other note I have here is...
Just a second. You used the word deceiving. I know our staff. They don't deceive. They may have some information different than yours, but I don't like to use the word deceiving. You can say your opinion is not correct, and I'll ask Mr. Goldfuss to respond to that after you finish your comments.
Fair enough. Fair enough. The other note is the 27 hours of training that was noted this evening at this meeting. That translates to 2.25 hours a month. I wouldn't be here talking to any of you this evening. My time is much, much more valuable than that to complain about 2.25 hours per month. I'm directly affected by this, and it's definitely way more, a magnitude of 4 or 5 times as suggested here. On the note of the map, I concur that that map is confusing, and I suggest, if for your consideration, Ms. Vela, is that you consider having a map and just label the quadrants on that map that are related to the pie chart, instead of explaining north of this road and west of that road. It's very confusing. Just a simple map with hatch purple areas 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the reader can correlate the two, as opposed to sitting there scratching my head for an hour to figure out whether I'm east, west of the railway or south, north. The other comment I have is this plan here. I noted that at the last meeting in October that this picture here is 25 years old, and that's reflected on there too. I built my house on View Road in 2009, and it's not even there. And I know, in talking to my neighbors, that the years when they built their homes and it's not there. So maybe it's suggesting that the area around the airport is not populated when it's definitely more populated than illustrated on that picture over there. And also, lastly, the flight supplement associated with the operation of the airport has noise, sorry, least but not last, I have another item too. It shows that there's a 1,000-foot ceiling in a noise abatement area, as suggested by the gentleman that just spoke to me, spoke just before I stood up, suggesting that there's areas that are sensitive to noise and how they, the pilots are aware of that and how they try and mitigate the impact to those residents. That there doesn't reflect the flight supplement for the Qualicum Beach Airport and the noise abatement areas. And lastly, the comment pertaining to real estate and the encumbrances put on real estate. I'm aware that there typically is encumbrances when you buy or have a property next to the airport. I confirm that there is none on my property, and I am of the opinion that there should be. And I think that the people that are being impacted should maybe consult with the appropriate council to determine some form of compensation for continued impact on our property. And because that should be definitely as part and parcel of the title of the land. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, at this point, we can provide some responses. I'm also looking at the clock. We're going to have another meeting at 6 o'clock about traffic, but I don't want to send anybody away without being heard. So if you come up here, would you keep your comments concise so that we can get as many in as possible? Go ahead. You've been waiting here patiently, too. Go ahead, sir.
Hi there, my name is Wolf Isaacson. Thank you, Council, for allowing us to be here today. My questions are just a couple of questions, more along the lines of Councillor Young. She asked about the $70,000 or $75,000 master plan. Now that says it was approved in December. Has that been paid out? Has that already been paid to the people to create the master plan?
No, we didn't do the master plan.
Okay. Okay, so that was just, it's approved and it's sitting there.
It was grant dependent and we didn't get the grant.
Oh yeah, so that's the second part of the question. This group, the BCAAP, you went to them for a $35,000 grant. That grant was not approved. Is the BCAAP a government agency or a private aviation consumer group that approves and so on these grants?
I'm going to let Mr. Colpus answer that. I think I know what it is, but I'd like it coming from him.
Thank you, Your Worship. The BCAAP is a provincial body. It's the provincial government.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. Typically, and so if I understand that statement, they turned you down, and for some reason it says area population greater than 10,000. Does that mean because we're under 10,000 we weren't approved, or what does that mean?
Well, Qualicum Beach is under 10,000, but we'd like to think we serve a larger area, so maybe next time we get a better response.
Right, but they're saying because we're under 10,000 that we didn't get that. Okay, the reason I say that is because sometimes these affiliations and these government agencies, they do that for a reason that they know if you're under 10,000, we're not going to give you a grant because we don't want to see that incentive grown, or we don't want to see that happen because there's no point. So that was a clarification, and thank you. To Mr. Harrison's point, he indicated that small towns don't make money off airports. That's correct, they don't. They're typically, there's no signs of anyone of this size of a nature making any profit. So my question to the council today is, what's the nature of the intent on the long term? Is the council looking for revenue for the city of Qualicum? Is that the nature and the purpose of trying to expand the airport? Or is it not even expand the airport, it's to get some sort of plan, like you say, a function for it in the future?
Okay, I think we'll take it as a rhetorical question. Each councillor can think about that as you posed it.
Okay.
And rather than wing it or go around the table, well, let the council think about that, because when we get the report, we'll have to keep that in mind. What is our purpose?
Okay.
So thank you for raising those.
Okay, because that was my concern. If it's a financial gain, then we need to really sit and rethink this, because there's no financial gain going forward. And where's that money coming from? You're going to put in $10 million into an airport, and how long, or if you're going to get that back? The interest rates, you're going to have to borrow the money, where you're going to get the funds, how's that going to be paid for, so on and so forth. So that was my point, and thank you for your time, all of you. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a fellow by the door. Come on up, sir. And then the gentleman, and you're next.
Thank you. My name is Kevin
Go
Lacroix.
to bat.
I'm a new resident for maybe 2.5 years. I just finished building a hangar at the airport. I understand it's the first hangar in 23 years. I operate an engineering company, and I love Qualicum Beach. So I can't help with any of the lead or noise or anything like that. But there is some education that could happen with how airplanes, the rules of the road, so to speak. If you can imagine, you're flying around, there's no lanes on the road, so it's very important for everybody else who's flying to be very predictable. And so to have a really routine path that you come in, and what's shown on the map there, you know, it's very routine to come in to land and which way you go. It's very routine to depart. It has to be very routine because you can't see everybody you're talking to. And they need to be very predictable in what they're doing. So that's just one example of how things work in the air. But I'd like to offer any councillor, any resident, anybody in the room, I'm very happy to have anybody come to the hangar and talk down to earth, one-on-one, how things work and how the airport works, how the path that we have to take, the rules that we have to follow unless they're changed, you know, things like that. I work there every day, so I don't know how that could work for people, but I have a company called Notch One Management. I suppose people could look it up and give me a call.
Thank you. I appreciate your welcoming. I don't think anybody here is telling us, get rid of the airport. They just don't want to hear as much noise. When most people actually like the airport, so that's not an issue. It's just trying to make it work for everybody. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Art Klingspoor, and I live here in Qualicum Beach. And I have a question about the survey. Now, who created the survey? Was it the consulting firm, or was it your team, or who was the creator of that?
Okay, Ms. Marilla?
I'm going to look across at my staff because I don't want to get that wrong. I believe the survey was developed in-house for town staff, which again is why we have that, as I'm calling it, a confusing categorization of residents there. So yes, that was
well, that wasn't,
created in-house.
The residencies and the geographical relations weren't really my question. My question is, do any of them have any experience in creating such a document? Because there were, I have a background, I have an MBA in marketing and finance. I took quite a few market survey, market research courses. And had I put a survey like this onto my, into my exam, I would have failed. There were a lot of internal inconsistencies, there were biases. For example, one question in particular said, implied anyway, that if you were in favor of medevac and search and rescue, you had to be in favor of this airport expanding and operating. Well, that's not true at all. They're not really connected.
All right, it's a good point.
Okay, that's just one point. Now,
we'll take an answer for that one. Go ahead.
Your Worship, I would just caution that when we talk about staff performance, there is a venue for that, and this isn't that. So again, you have a very talented staff team. If council has any concerns about the survey or the way it was put forward, or members of the public do, please address that to your council. It isn't the place for it.
Okay,
in a
I
public
apologize, and I did
Thank
not mean
you.
to be any personal slights or anything. They're not simple things to create, and minor differences in wordage can make a huge difference in the value of the results. And unless you do it right, the results are suspect. Any conclusion you make on them is kind of suspect too. Now,
So I appreciate your apology, and I also wouldn't mind if you had some ideas of how to make it better. If you could send that to us by email.
I could certainly try. I'd be happy to give you a critique if you know, give me some time on that.
Thank you.
The question, you know, another thing I saw was this report that is just being tabled. It's 160 pages of the consultant's report, for which we've paid $20,000, $30,000, I'm assuming, something like that. And I looked at it and I thought, gee, I only saw it this afternoon. 160 pages is going to be a tough read. But then I found that the last 40 pages were basically the age-friendly transportation plan already in existence that the town of Qualicum Beach put forward. Then the 50 pages or 40 pages before that were pictures and specs of e-planes, of electronic airplanes and such. And then the petition that was put in by Qualicum Woods Group, and a staff report, and a flight school blog about what the flight school does. That was another 30 pages. Then there was a verbatim comments from the summary, question 13, and verbatim written down as part of this report, none of which I found very useful in making a direction from the report for decision-making for the council. It's all true, perhaps, but doesn't really mean anything. The survey interpretations, including blank pages, took another bunch of pages, so there was only about 10 or 12 pages of actual conclusions and reports, none of which included any financial information. And which leads me to a question I have: where can I find financial information on the airport? There is no financials published on your website. There is a general town of Qualicum Beach financials, but when you look for contributions from the airport, you don't see any. I expect there aren't any from what Councillor Harrison has said, and I expect there won't be any. So clearly this is not an economic decision whatsoever. It makes no sense monetarily to do anything with the airport.
Regarding financial information, Ms. Varela, I think we do have a budget book that is public.
Thank you, Worship. And if council or a member of the public wants more detail, and that request can be made through to staff. Again, staff really bend over backwards when requests are posed, and so we're happy to provide any information. Just make the request.
And as far as I'm concerned, I read the report too. And I don't need to have all the exact location of people or exactly when it happened or how many times it happened to realize that there is an issue that we need to address. That's very clear.
Well, you already knew that, sir, though.
So your point is valid, but to be specific in certain questions and how they were asked, in my opinion, we get the point. Thank you.
Well, it wasn't, and there's so many points I barely know where to begin. Like with the complaints, you say 62 complaints. At the meeting in November, there were only 2, according to the manager, said there hadn't been any complaints all year, only 2 complaints. Well, I live in Qualicum Woods. I would have complained every day all summer long had I known there was a place to complain to. Today, in this afternoon, there's a helicopter, a big yellow helicopter flying over at about 200 feet. Rattled my windows and it was gone. It was no big deal. I didn't send in a complaint. Every time somebody flies over low and I send in a complaint, I do 10 a day for no point. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. Well, I guess that's all I have to say. I find myself sort of flabbergasted that we're even visiting this. It's a waste of time and money and your energies. You've got all kinds of other stuff to do. You've got housing incentives you have to do. You've got all kinds of stuff. And here we are, how to lose money for the town. Doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. I think it's important for the community, and we've had comments about having committee meetings. We think having a meeting where all of staff, all of council is present, and where people can hear each other's comments is a better way to spend staff time and council time, to hear it all at once, where people can hear each other's comments. So I'm sorry if it doesn't satisfy some people's expectation, but this is the first time, and I've been here for a long time, and I don't think we've had this kind of an outreach with public meetings, with staff, with NAFCAN, everybody else there, to really get to the point of what we can do better. And this council is committed, and staff is too, to try and serve you better. So we think, contrary to what some people might think, this wasn't a waste of time. I've learned a lot from it, and I'm continuing to learn from it. I'm going to have to turn this fellow off. Sorry about that. So we do have another meeting after, but we can go on for a little while. As long as people know in outside that we'll get to the age-friendly traffic study, but I don't want to send anybody away who'd like to make some comments about the airport. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's probably just useful for the public to be aware that it's the entire agenda package is for the Committee of the Whole today. So we do have the airport report at 4:30, and then we're going to the age-friendly transportation plan. So that agenda package that included all that information did reflect the matter of business before council tonight. So it wasn't just the airport report. I thought it was useful to clarify.
Yeah, and we thought maybe the people who are concerned about traffic would like to hear about air traffic as well. I'm kidding. Go ahead, Todd.
Well, I'm a resident. Oh, yeah, I think so. It looks green. Okay. My name is Todd Prove. I'm a resident of Qualicum Beach. Firstly, I'd like to thank council and staff for engaging in the airport review project. It has been very much appreciated to have an opportunity to voice our concerns as residents to the town about airport issues. Having read the consultant's report, we'd like to offer some feedback. Dominant themes of the feedback, as you've heard from numerous residents, are concerns about noise from aircraft, the use of leaded fuel, and asking for the flight path to return to the southbound away from populated areas. These comments are consistent with what I hear from residents of Qualicum Woods. On the subject of noise, numerous people have proposed that pilots, when safe to do so, and I heard the previous speaker, turn southbound and continue southbound past the railway until they were away from heavily populated areas. As a layperson, reviewing the current Transport Canada flight path rules, they do allow turns to the south as soon as it's safe to do so. And I've had discussions with Mr. Goldfuss about this. So there are therefore no legal impediments to this suggestion, and I think that's what Councillor Van der Valk was sort of trying to clarify. Could all planes go to the south if there was a discussion about that? And I understand that there are different conditions and operational considerations. There are times when that won't be possible. We understand that. We've always said that. And we've always said we want to coexist with the airport. We support our airport. But we look for consideration and cooperation on issues such as noise. I recently provided the town with a detailed log of flights for an hour on the 16th of December. And I observed, as many others do, that flights that flew directly over Qualicum Woods, Crystalton Park, Village Way, or even followed the railway, as Mr. Goldfuss has said a lot of pilots indicate they fly, they make a significant amount of noise that's disturbing. But the one plane that I observed that time period that headed south on takeoff and continued towards the direction of Highway 19 made a relatively low amount of observed noise by comparison. Now, I think if as many people as possible, when safe to do so, could fly more towards Highway 19 and away from the populated areas, this would address the majority of noise complaints. And we would all have to spend a lot less time discussing these issues. So I think it's worthy of consideration. There's a program that in Pitt Meadows, it's been changed by name to Good Neighbors, but it originated as Fly Neighborly. And one of the founders of Fly Neighborly showed that their philosophy of the program is just flying safely and in compliance with the regulations is not enough. We must also fly neighborly, and it is in the best interest of everyone. Adopting this airport culture would go a long way to support the community and the airport to coexist with less conflict. You now have, as council and the town, the factual information from your review to support a requested change to Transport Canada to the noise abatement procedure. The reason that voluntary change to pilot behavior and the proposed changes to the flight path are important is that even though the town created a system for complaints for the airport, and we appreciate that, and we were glad it was publicized, and we mentioned that to a lot of people, that complaint system is there, but the response that people get when they make a complaint to that system is that unless there's a technical violation, no further action is to be taken by staff. And that becomes very frustrating for people when they've submitted these complaints and they try and make council and the town aware of the impact that noise is having on their well-being. Many people have commented that outdoor activities, social interactions, and general quality of life are being negatively impacted by the noise. Now, I want to thank Mr. Goldfuss for meeting with me to discuss these issues. I also want to thank him for exploring the possible supply of unleaded fuel to Qualicum Beach pilots, and I hope that council will be equally supportive of this vital change. Research has shown there is no safe level of lead exposure for human, and one speaker was asking, about that. There are numerous recent studies which document the serious health concerns for people living within close proximity to an airport, such as stunted intellectual development for children. Now, Arrowview Elementary is within 600 meters of aircraft that fly straight out over Qualicum Woods and that way. And it's a significant increase lead exposure for cardiac health for adults. I contacted the National Research Council, the scientists there, and he advised us when we asked about unleaded aviation fuel. He studied it on behalf of Transport Canada, Health Canada, Environment Canada. He said there is no reason that currently, now it's FAA certified, it's in the States, I understand that, but there's no reason that certified UL fuel couldn't be used by 70% of single piston planes. And again, I've spoken with Mr. Goldfuss at length about this. I understand that the federal government has to make changes in order for that to happen. But I think there's a role for Qualicum Beach as leaders in this area, as you've exemplified through the examples given in the report, that you could proactively explore how to supply unleaded fuel when it becomes available for use in Canada. And you could work with federal authorities to implement these changes as soon as possible, and also advocate with those federal authorities and your contacts in the federal government to improve the health of our community. The staff recommendation that there be an annual public meeting on airport issues is a positive start, so thank you for that. However, as a couple of councillors and members of the public have already commented, we don't believe that's enough. Airport issues affect people on a daily basis. It affects their quality of life. So town should be implementing a wider airport issues committee. Transport Canada states each airport should set up a noise management committee that includes citizen representatives. Qualicum Beach would exemplify their continued leadership and support for the public on airport issues by implementing a similar committee that met at least quarterly to address ongoing concerns. Thank you again for all your efforts and for listening to your community. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask, because I got to keep the watch in time. So I see 3 hands go up. If I can ask those 3 and then we'll stop there, if that's okay. So the fella there with the black beard, come on up. I saw you a couple of times, so you definitely been waiting patiently. Thank you. And then that gentleman there, and then one more in the back. Thank you.
Thank you, Tunis. Thank you, Council. My name is Patrick Horsfield. I am born and raised in Qualicum Beach. I live here with my young family. My siblings all raised their families in town. I am, I guess, lucky enough to have earned my private pilot's license and fiscally irresponsible enough to own an aircraft. I can't help but feel that despite the expressions of support, half the people in this room would love to see the cessation of operations at the airport.
No, I wouldn't.
Thank you. I'll make my statements here, and you can rebut them if you wish. But the airport was opened in 1954.
Just a second. At the beginning, I asked everyone to respectfully listen to each other, so go ahead.
So, the airport was opened in 1954. I suspect that's well before many residents were here. well before many people in this room bought homes. The fact that the airport has been there and operating says something. Councillor Harrison made mention of the economics of the airport. While there may not be direct economic benefit, I will say there is a lot of indirect economics that the airport brings to Qualicum Beach. Be it through businesses at the airport. We love the restaurant, we love the local businesses that work there. The businesses in town, they all benefit from this. In my short time flying, I can say that I have seen a significant number of friends, family, people from all over the island, the Gulf Coast, Vancouver, even the interior stop in, spend time in Qualicum Beach, patronizing our businesses, patronizing this town, and I think it's a great thing for Qualicum. That said, I think it's probably very pertinent that the general public understand what the town council can and cannot do, what is within your purview. Transport Canada, Nav Canada determine flight routes, instrument approaches, instrument departures in this area. I understand the noise issue. I get it. And everybody I fly with, everybody I know respects the noise abatement procedure. But you cannot, in all instances, mitigate the noise. It's part of having an airport, and I'm sorry. The land is granted for airport use. You're going to run an airport or you're not going to run an airport, but those are your options, right? So thank you for your time. I will get out of the way and let somebody who's more eloquent speak.
I think you did quite well, and there's not just two options, there's another option, and that is trying to work with everybody, and I think we can. There was another fellow in the back, yes, sir, and that one, and then you. And we'll leave it at that if that's okay. Thank you.
I haven't seen the club for quite a while. Fred used to be a member of the Flying Club. My name's Dave Chatters. I live here. I'm a pilot. I do average flying around here. Most of us fly, according to the insurance people, most of us fly between 15 and 40 hours a year. So we don't do a lot of flying around here. That diagram over there is very accurate. Most of the flying is done in that small green section. Most of the flying takes off on runway 29. 90% of the time we run 29, so we have a choice of going left or going right. We don't go any other direction. But if we're in a circuit, if we're joining a circuit, we're descending, it's always on this side. You know, so most of us spend our time on this side of the island. Now, I thought there was a possible way that we could resolve it. Obviously, there's some people here that are upset about the airport and about the noise. Some people feel very passionate about it. Some people have a genuine concern about it. Some people are just wasting our time and your time. So I wondered if you would consider the possibility that when someone complained to the council, their complaint was taken very seriously, and that complaint was put on the title of their home. If it was at all possible, it would show them who was interested in telling people of the future what's happening, or just grumbling. Just if you can put it on the title of their home when they complain, that'll be there for future owners of their home. So they'd know about it then when they arrived, they'd know about it. You know, a lot of these people seem to think that when they bought a house next to an airport, that somehow it would be quiet. I don't understand it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Your Worship, Council, thanks for the time. My name is Greg Howard. I'm a local pilot, aircraft owner. I fly professionally, hold an airline transport pilot license. I think a lot of what I wanted to bring up was already covered. It's been talked about being revenue positive at the airport. I think it's important that we understand that airports are infrastructure, much as a highway is. Your highway is not expected to be revenue positive. Being at the airport, I would love to see it at least break even and make some money for the town. But the money that it brings in to the community, I was a paramedic locally here for 10 years, so flew many people in and out of the airport. It's also a hub for much of the island, so when it's foggy in Tofino or Port Alberni, the medevac helicopter, the airplane will land here, and a ground crew will take the people out. Pat covered nicely. I've been a professional pilot for 30 years, off and on, and there seems to be a lot of confusion about fuels and procedures. I'm a director at large for the Flying Club, and every Wednesday we have a open door coffee. I'd just like to say, I can't speak for the Flying Club as a director at large, but personally, I feel like just to sit around a coffee table, people had some questions, could settle a lot of the misunderstandings about lead and fuel and traffic procedures and just exactly how effective noise abatement procedures are. Because as a professional pilot, flying jet airplanes, we follow noise abatement procedures every day. And unfortunately, even the best noise abatement procedures seldom have much effect on the ground despite the effort that's put into them. So when you spend a significant amount of money putting microphones out and measuring the before and after effects of noise abatement procedures, even with turbojet aircraft, it's a minimal change in the noise footprint. So I appreciate the distress of some of the people here. I see it clearly affects them deeply. And I'd just like to say personally, as a pilot locally, we would all like to be great neighbors. And I would encourage maybe some open dialogue and sitting around. And I think there's a big block in between. I think if we could take that down and just sit around a cup of coffee, we could probably solve a lot of the problems here.
So let me get that right. On Wednesday mornings?
Wednesday mornings, the Flying Club, usually starting about 9:30.
So that's about the fourth hangar, fourth building in, roughly?
Yeah, we've got a sign on the outside, yeah.
Okay, so that's from 10 o'clock till, what time?
Yeah, it's a couple hours. It's a couple hours. But okay. The aviation community is incredible and supportive and a very positive place to be. And I think if we could have a few people sit around a coffee table, we could solve a lot of the problems.
And I'm not asking for the address and the time and all that to get everybody out of our hair, so to speak, but yeah. I think to have a conversation with pilots, with what's going on at the airport, is very generous of you. Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody approaches me after, I'm happy to give a phone number too. So thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Councillor Harrison.
So just one thing regarding the change in flight path. I recall a conversation with staff in September when we had sort of a in-house discussion of things airport related. My understanding, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, that was a requirement from Transport Canada why we changed the flight path. And so to go back to the previous flight path, I don't think that's really on the table because if I recall correctly, there was a safety reason for that change in the flight path. So I'm not sure. Maybe staff just correct me if I'm wrong on that. Maybe Mr. Goldfuss wants to corroborate that.
Mr. Goldfuss.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Harrison. So flight paths are a regulatory through transport, or pardon me, noise abatement procedures are a regulatory requirement. And what they require is extensive public consultation in order to put an application in. So what the Ministry of Transport wants to ensure is that all stakeholders at the airport, for an example, the public at large, have been extensively consulted. And through that consultation, then we would gather as staff, we would gather that information, and then we would see if, or determine, if you will, if it's viable. And for an example, if it would be viable, then you'd put in an application for that, okay? So we know that we already have a noise abatement procedure in place. That was put in place in 2016. I can't speak to anything prior to that. I wasn't here. But from what I understand, this is your noise abatement procedure, and this is the one that was selected through public consultation.
I just want to follow up on that because we've had a lot of comments from folks who say something's changed in 2016. And I think this is more in-depth and complete public consultation than we've had for as long as I've been around. So if this qualifies as public consultation, then could the town, through staff, apply to have that flight path changed back to what people call towards Rupert Road?
So thank you, Your Worship. This would not qualify for public consultation. What we would need to do as staff is we would need to provide the criteria back to council. Council would then need to make a decision and direct staff to start that process as per the Transport Canada regulations and criteria.
Thank you, because I think that would give people some assurance that we'll try and look at ways to mitigate the concerns. I've been around here since 1973, and I've flown with different airlines, and there was a different flight path than the ones I've taken recently. So I think with that, and Council can talk some more about that, that we would look at how we get that process going of public consultation and then act accordingly. So thank you for raising that question, Councilor Harrison.
And I just want to clarify too, before we start that process, we might want to double check to make sure that it wasn't basically a diktat from Transport Canada saying thou shalt change. Because if that's the case, the reason isn't because of consultation. It's because there's a hard safety rule behind it, and then ultimately that process is moot. If it's something where it just requires consultation, by all means, let's have that conversation, but it might be good. I might be misremembering a conversation from 6 months ago. That's possible. But if it is the case that basically Transport Canada says thou shalt change no matter what you want to do, it might you could just have that public information so folks can realize that this is the reason why it changed and it wasn't, for other considerations.
And you're right, we have to get to the facts of the matter. Thank you. So with that, I want to thank you for coming out today and for your very respectful and in-depth questions. I think we took a lot of notes. This is all recorded. So we'll not let this go. Okay, we got that one done. We'll take a close look. You have a very hardworking council who will look at options to make your life better. Thank you.
Your Worship, should we move the staff recommendations?
I'm going to take a 10-minute recess. Yeah. It's just a council. It's a recommendation to council, so that's okay. Hi, Fred. Heather, can we take those things off? No, there's no food involved. Thank you. I'm calling the meeting back to order. And the issue for the rest of the evening will be around the age-friendly transportation plan. There were, pardon?
Sorry, Your Worship, I was just looking at the agenda. Should we maybe look at the recommendations?
Yes, and I saw that, and I think we need to have a discussion about the annual meetings, or have other ideas. So I think the recommendations are pretty perfunctory, and they can be at our council meeting to deal with that and have a discussion how we could do it. Because I have some other ideas, and I know other councils have too, about how we could move forward. So with your cooperation, and the same with the three-phase power, I think we're going to have some very good news when we have the council meeting about that.
If I could, then would I recommend maybe that we move the first and third and just leave the second?
Pardon?
Could we maybe move the first and third? We receive it for information, and then we defer
Yes.
the report, and then
we can
second,
receive.
You're right. There's more to talk about.
Yeah. So if we received it for information and we take them all three at the same time, I think we're fine with that. Councillor Harrison, will you move that?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Sorry, I meant moving 1 and 3, I think, if I may, and just leaving 2 aside as.
Okay, 1 and 3. Thank you. Have a second for that? Councillor Skipsey? See, I really want to get into the traffic thing. So at this point, can we leave this for now? Because people have been waiting already half an hour longer than they thought they might. So I would, if you indulge me, I would really like to get into the traffic issues tonight. If everyone's okay with that, I mean, I need your support. Yep, okay. All right.
Can you withdraw your motion then?
Well, it wasn't seconded, so it's okay. So we had the recess. That was easy. Staff reports about engineering and operations. Who's going to start? Mr. Weir.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So we're pleased again tonight to have Richard Dedoul with us on the line to make a presentation of the final form of the age-friendly Transportation Plan 2023 update for Council's consideration tonight. So I guess I gotta. That's okay.
Hey, Richard, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, well, listen closely because Mr. Weir is going to start the meeting off. So stand by. Thank you. Mr. Weir.
Thank you.
Mr. Weir.
Well, to conclude my introductions, I'd say we now have Richard Dedoul, our transportation engineering consultant, on the phone to give this final presentation of the 2023 update of the Age-Friendly Transportation Plan to Council. Mr. Dedoul.
Mr. Dedoul, I'm going to move my microphone towards you so that everybody can hear you better. There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, good. And I assume the slide presentation is running. I can't see it on the live stream, but assuming we've got that up there, I'm going to get going. I do want to thank you for accommodating me to give this presentation remotely. I'd prefer that if I could be there in person, but unfortunately that's just not possible for me right now. So again, I appreciate you accommodating me this way. So I'm going to begin with a presentation on the Age-Friendly Transportation Plan. This is the third presentation that I've given you regarding the Age-Friendly Transportation Plan. I gave you a presentation back in June where we talked about issues that the plan was going to address. A second presentation in November where we talked about potential projects and we solicited feedback from the community. This presentation, I'll be talking about recommended priority projects. So if we go to the next slide, please, slide number 2. So some of these slides you'll have seen before if you were at the second meeting, but I know some people might not have been able to attend that. So I'm just going to quickly cover some of the material from that earlier meeting. What is age-friendly? Basically, it's accommodating persons of all ages and abilities and all modes of transportation. That's what we're attempting to achieve with the Age-Friendly Transportation Plan. Next slide, please. And there are two goals that the plan establishes. One is to improve mobility, and that's priority is to use for active transportation modes, so that's walking and cycling. That even includes walking to the bus, but it includes all modes. We're not overlooking other modes. We want to improve or maintain mobility for all modes of transportation with an emphasis on active modes. Same with safety. We want to improve safety. Priority is vulnerable users. Those are children, seniors, people with disabilities, anyone else who's disadvantaged. But again, we want to ensure that safety is maintained or improved for all road users. So everyone who's cycling, walking, driving, everyone. So next slide, please. So the plan, there's four purposes identified in the plan, but I want to draw your attention to the third one, because this is really the key to the plan, and that's what's driving what we'll be talking about tonight, and that is to prioritize projects. There's a number of projects in the plan. I think we're up to about 80 different projects in this version of the plan, and the town doesn't have unlimited funds. You only have so much you can spend every year. So the question is, the challenge is, where do you start? Which projects do you pick to spend your money on first? You want to spend wisely, and what the plan does is it identifies those top priority projects that give you the highest return on your investment in terms of those two goals that I just talked about, improving mobility and improving safety. And what I'll be doing tonight is just reviewing some of those higher priority projects that have come out of the plan. Next slide, please. We should be on slide 5 now with the flow chart. So this slide shows what's happened with the age-friendly transportation plan since the plan was originally adopted back in 2013. So this is now the 5th update of the plan. The key thing that we've done this time round is we've incorporated the results of a safety study for Highway 19A. And that's all of those projects have been rolled into the age-friendly transportation plan, along with other new projects identified elsewhere in the town, and I'll be covering all of those. But let's first talk about Highway 19A, because again, that's the highlight of the plan. So again, next slide, please. So this slide shows the roundabout that was recently built on the waterfront down at the foot of Memorial on Highway 19A. There's a number of other issues that we want to address on Highway 19A. Speeding is probably one of the number one issues. We collected speed data up and down the highway and found that almost everywhere people are driving too fast. I don't think anyone's surprised to hear that result. Pedestrian safety, more crossings for pedestrians, improved facilities for cyclists, so better ways to enhance parking, and just some safe intersection safety. This roundabout was one way of improving intersection safety and addressing speeding in that particular location. So now the question is, what else can we do elsewhere along the highway? Next slide, please. So now we're on, this slide shows all the projects that are in the age-friendly transportation plan on Highway 19A. The projects that have already been completed since the original plan was adopted 10 years ago are shown in light green. So there's several things there. There's the roundabout I was just talking about at the foot of Memorial, several flashing crossings, a speed display sign, and a waterfront walkway connection that connects up the waterfront walkway where there's a number of houses. Projects that were already in the age-friendly transportation plan in previous versions and are still in the plan this time are shown in dark green, and all the new projects that have come out of that Highway 19A safety study are shown in orange. So I'm going to talk about some of the, again, priority projects, the highest priority ones, the ones the town will want to turn its attention to first. And I'll start talking about those with the next slide, please. This will be slide 8. So this slide shows the new crossing that was put in a couple of years ago at Hemsworth Road on Highway 19A. It incorporates RRFBs, which are rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Those are those ones, the lights that flash on and off. They're similar to the kind you see on emergency vehicles. So those are included in this crossing here, as well as median islands in the center of the roadway between the two directions of travel. So the Highway 19A safety study, and now in the age-friendly transportation plan, identifies a number of new RRFB crossings elsewhere on the highway: Buller Road, Garrett Road, Crescent Road West, Hull Road, and Qualicum Road. And And where possible at those crossings, they will incorporate the median islands, just like you see in this picture here. It may not be possible at every location to do median islands, but we should be able to do them in most locations. We're also going to look at putting median islands in at intermediate locations along the waterfront, because basically these things have been shown to reduce traffic speeds by 3 to 8 kilometers an hour. So it's one way of getting people to slow down, as well as, in this case, also improving pedestrian safety. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of the speed display sign that's on Highway 19A at Hall Road heading westbound. It flashes when you're going over 55 kilometers an hour, and it encourages you to slow down. The age-friendly plan now includes a second sign in the other direction when you come into Qualicum Beach at Higson Crescent. That's just east of Laburnum Road. And again, these signs have been shown to reduce speeding by up to 10 kilometers an hour elsewhere. When we looked at the speed data for this particular sign at Hall Road, we found it reduced traffic speeds about 3 kilometers an hour, but more significantly, there was 30% fewer vehicles that were driving over 55 kilometers an hour. So it really cut down the number of people going over that 55 kilometer an hour limit. So the other thing I want to point out here is to mention that Highway 19A is an arterial road, so we can't do all the kinds of traffic calming on Highway 19A that we might do on some other roads. So we're a bit more limited. We can't use, for example, speed humps on Highway 19A as a way of slowing people down. So we're looking at other devices like median islands and speed display sign, and I'll talk about a few more in a moment. Next slide, please. So now we're looking at the roundabout that's intended to be put in at Village Way Country Club Drive. And this has been a top 5 priority in the plan for a while now. Unfortunately, it's a very expensive project, so it will require some cost share funding for the town to be able to undertake this. But this will improve intersection safety. It'll facilitate access for cyclists and pedestrians, just help people getting in and out of Eagle Crest better as well. And it will reduce speeds on this section of Highway 19A. So a number of benefits to this roundabout. It is a top 5 priority, but again, it's expensive, so that's been the big holdup to date. Another top 5, or another priority project, not in the top 5, but up near the top of the list, is to get rid of the channelized right turn lane at Bennett Road. So this is when you're heading eastbound and turning right to go southbound on Bennett Road, excuse me, is that right now there's a separate right turn lane that you can make that right turn at pretty good speed. And there's a school crosswalk there, and it's not controlled. There's nothing to stop people at that crosswalk. So instead, what we're proposing to do is take that right turn lane out, keep the right turn lane on the highway so that you're in the right turn lane, you have to come up to a stop bar, stop for pedestrians or whatever, then make the right turn, just as you would at any other intersection, rather than having that free flow, in effect, right turn lane that's there now. Next slide, please. This will be slide 12. So this slide shows an example of something that we want to do on Highway 19A as well, which is a complete street design. There's an opportunity to do this on the section of Highway 19A between Crescent Road West and Memorial Avenue that's scheduled to be repaved within the next couple of years. The pavement's in pretty bad shape. So while we're repaving the road, we can basically reconfigure some of the roadway as well to achieve several objectives, to improve safety, to accommodate other uses, not just cars, but pedestrians and cyclists and transit and parking. And we can discourage speeding as well through some of these changes to the roadway. This example is Bowen Road in Nanaimo. So it's a 4-lane road, but it gives you the idea that the road has been reconfigured. If you look closely, you can see that the traffic lanes on the right-hand side are now narrower than they were before. And what's happened is they've added in bike lanes in both directions. But one of the key features of a complete street design is the narrower traffic lanes. So next slide, please. So this slide lists all the features of a complete street, and like I mentioned, narrower traffic lanes in the top right there is one of the key features. Studies have shown narrower traffic lanes reduce traffic speeds. Interestingly, narrower traffic lanes also reduce the number of crashes between intersections, not at the intersections, but actually between the intersections. So it makes the road safer, and again, as in that example of Bowen Road, narrowing the traffic lanes down creates more room to put in other features. So we can look at things like protected bicycle lanes, walkways and pathways. We can look at adding parking bays, even landscaping and other features. So there's an opportunity to make the street more inviting for pedestrians and cyclists and others, and to address some of the key issues there, including speeding. So that's Highway 19A. If we go to the next slide, please, that'll be slide 14. I'll just cover some of the other priority projects on other roads throughout the town. And again, here's some of the key issues that people told us about and that we've heard from over the past few years that we are addressing with this plan. Next slide. So again, here you see a map of the town, and this is all the other projects. The previous one showed you Highway 19A. Well, this is the rest of the roads in the town. Again, the ones in light green are the things that have been implemented to date. Dark green are the things that were in the plan already and are still in the plan, and orange are the projects that are now being added in this version of the plan. So I'll talk about a few of these, again, just focusing on the priority ones. There's a lot more here, but I'm focusing on the ones that are at the top of the list. Excuse me. Okay, so first one, next slide, is slide 16. This shows Village Way in front of Qualicum Secondary School. And the idea here is to implement some traffic calming. In effect, it's somewhat of a complete street design, like I was talking about earlier for Highway 19A. It incorporates better facilities for pedestrians. It includes some defined parking bays. It includes a speed display sign as well, improved pedestrian crossings. And the idea, again, is to discourage speeding along this section of Village Way, improve safety for pedestrians, and just better organize the activity in front of KSS. And this is a top 5 priority as well. There's also, to the east on Village Way, some new crossings identified as well at Berwick, Nootka, and Hollywood, and upgrading the flashing crossings at Hemsworth Road to RRFBs. Let's go to the next slide, slide 17. This is First Avenue. So basically the problem here is we have a 40-kilometer-an-hour playground speed limit during the daytime. That's only if it applies during the daytime at the park. And people are going a lot faster than that. We find our speeds are up in the 66 to 67 kilometer-an-hour speed for what we call the 85th percentile. So 15% of people are going that fast or even faster. So it's a straight, flat road with good visibility, so it's not a surprise that people are driving too fast, but we don't want that. So what we're proposing to start with here as a way of discouraging speeding is to add a raised crosswalk at Rye at one end of the 40-kilometer-an-hour zone, and near the other end, a speed table, which is similar to a raised crosswalk, but without the crosswalk part of it, a speed table at Cedar. So it should reduce traffic speeds by, again, based on experience elsewhere, somewhere between 5 to 13 kilometers an hour, which will help to get people down and also just alert them to the fact that there's something different going on here. This is a 40-kilometer-an-hour playground zone. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the intersection on Memorial at First. This has been in the top 10 priority for a while. It would probably be a higher priority, but the rail line is delaying the whole project, so that's driven it down in terms of its space in the list of priorities, just because the town has to wait for the railway, the status of the railway to be resolved. Currently, what we want to do is put a traffic signal in at First and Memorial. We want to put a crosswalk on the north side of the intersection. There isn't one there right now. We want to continue the pathway that comes up from the waterfront along Memorial Avenue. We want to continue that all the way to this intersection. But a lot of those things can't be done or can only be done with spending several $100,000 because the rail line is considered an active rail line. So hopefully the status will be sorted out sometime in the near future. In the meantime, it may be possible to at least extend the pathway down the east side of the of Memorial Avenue by narrowing Memorial Avenue. So we're not actually having to widen the railway crossing. We're just going to make the road narrower so we can make the sidewalk, in effect, turn it into a pathway to at least complete that pathway connection. Next slide, please. So here's a summary of some of the priority projects on other roads throughout the town. A number of other locations with RRFB crossings. Bennett Road at Sunrise Drive, that one, the town's already prepared a design for that and has submitted an application for a grant. So that's basically, if you head out from downtown along the Dolly Mount Trail, when you get to Bennett Road, that's where you cross over Bennett Road to get into Chartwell. So that's what that crossing's all about. There's some new ones in here. We've added a crossing on Jones at Fern and a crossing on Memorial at 4th, and Laburnum at Claymore. That crossing would be upgraded from just regular flashing orange beacons to RRFBs. One of the other top 5 priority projects is what we call the Downtown Trail. It's basically connects up the Dolly Mount Trail with the Harlech Trail to the west. So it runs along Harlech Road between Beach Road and Memorial. So it's kind of the center of that whole east-west trail connection through the town. That is a top 5 priority. We've got some other projects on here that are also priorities. Next slide, please. And just a few other, finishing things up with a few other small projects that would be priorities, some trail etiquette signage, some bicycle route signs and wayfinding signs just to help people get around better. And the town's recently acquired a mobile speed display, which is like that speed display sign I was showing you earlier on Highway 19A at Hall Road, but this one's portable, so you can move it around, and generally you park it somewhere for a week or two and then move it on. It just helps to reinforce or discourage speeding, and it gives you the ability to cover a number of locations in town. So those are all priority projects. The plans also identified a few other things that aren't really part of the plan because they're just simple things that the town can do right away without having to wait for the plan, like improving the sight distances at the Crescent Road intersection west on Highway 19A, and even at the pedestrian crossing at Shady Rest. So there's some simple things in the plan that really aren't part of that list of prioritized projects. I do want to take the opportunity here to talk about the priorities and in the criteria that we use to evaluate the priorities and determine what's the higher priority. If you look in the report, you'll see they're listed on beginning on page 20. But what we do is we have 6 different criteria. We look at safety, we look at how many people are using it, we look at how important that particular project is within the transportation network, and we look at cost and other factors. And we rate everything on a scale of 1 to 5. And 5 is the highest score, the best score, 1 is the lowest score. So things that get a cumulative score, the highest score, are the priorities. And one of the ones, the question's been asked about the cost that we use. So again, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 are the projects that are the lowest cost, and a score of 1 is for the projects that are the highest cost. And in the plan, it says that the lowest cost are projects that are, for example, less than $5,000, and the highest cost ones are projects that, for example, are over $1 million. And we have one project in the plan that's around $5,000. That's a signage project, and we have a couple of projects that are at the other end of the scale. They're more than $1 million. Those are the 2 roundabouts. And everything else is rated relative to those 2 projects on that scale of 1 to 5. So other projects get scores of 2, 3, or 4. So the question was asked was, costs have gone up in the past few years. Does that change the ratings? No, it doesn't change the ratings. The ratings are all relative, and as long as there's a project down at the bottom end, an inexpensive project that's around $5,000, and a project that's over $1 million, the ratings are all still going to fall on that scale of somewhere between 5,000 and more than $1 million, even though the actual projects themselves might be more expensive to build today than they would have been had we built them a few years ago. The cost estimates haven't been actually prepared for individual projects at this level of detail. We haven't done that to cost them out. It's not necessary to prioritize projects, but the high priority projects, staff will develop cost estimates for those as part of the town's budgeting process. So the ones that I've been talking about in this presentation that are priorities, when it comes time to consider implementing those, that's when staff will be developing cost estimates along with developing designs where appropriate. So if we go to the next slide, please. This is just a summary of the completed projects that we've done over the last 10 years. So again, the original age-friendly transportation plan was implemented in adopted in 2013. A number of improvements. It's actually quite impressive. You know, I do this kind of work all around BC, and I'd have to say that Qualicum Beach, for a community of your size, has done a remarkable amount of stuff in the last 10 years. And there's quite a list here of things that has been accomplished. I'm looking forward to another 10 years of this level of success with the age-friendly transportation plan. So next slide, please. So there's two resolutions that are attached to this presentation and to the report that's in the agenda package, that the age-friendly transportation plan 2023 update dated 31st of January be renamed Town of Qualicum Beach Community Transportation Plan. So the point there is we called it the age-friendly transportation plan originally 10 years ago because the town got a grant to do an age-friendly transportation plan, so we called it that. But as has been pointed out, there's probably a better name, and the name that's been proposed is Community Transportation Plan, for sure. And further that transportation infrastructure investments be prioritized in accordance with this now renamed Community Transportation Plan. So again, in the plan, there's a long list of priorities, and as you've been doing for the past 10 years quite successfully, I encourage you to continue to use that list to identify the priority projects that give you the best bang for your buck, the highest return on your investment. So there we go. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I have a second presentation, I believe, though, that I'm supposed to do at this point. Or I don't know if we want to do questions first.
I think we got a pretty good session here, Richard. So I'll ask council if there's any questions, and then I'll ask the gallery if there's any questions regarding your presentation so far. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. Just through the chair, I'm looking at the list of projects, and I do see Memorial Avenue and 4th, and it has a recommendation essentially for the flashing crosswalk signs. And I'm thinking that when Naked Naturals goes in, that's going to be one of the main points for which vehicles will be leaving the parking lot for Naked Naturals. So is the recommendation based on the existing development, or is it planning ahead for that massive development that's going to be happening there, and then all the cars trying to come through essentially a crosswalk right after a traffic light? I just wanted to check that.
Did you hear the question, Richard?
I did. I didn't hear all of it, but I think the question related to the planned development of the garage, some of the development in that area, and there was a recommendation for a new flashing crosswalk on Memorial at 4th, and the question is that related to the future development?
That's right. The question is it related to future development or for the current situation?
Development. So I expect that there may be some changes to that. There could be a change to that particular recommendation. There could be other recommendations or projects that would be associated with the development that might then be in future incorporated into the community transportation plan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't essentially assign funds to something because it's a high priority, and then 2 years later we have to do more upgrades at that same location.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Skipsey?
Sure. I have a few questions. Recently, I participated in an accessibility challenge, and a couple of things came to light, like the amount of time that is provided to cross at the intersection of Fern and Memorial. It just didn't seem like enough, especially even just for an able-bodied person to get across, but if you had any additional challenges. The other thing is we couldn't hear it when other vehicles came by. It wasn't loud enough to be able to hear it. Another thing was there was an intersection or a sidewalk along the north side of Naked Naturals, I guess, and it's very narrow, and I don't know. But now that we have an accessibility committee, I'm wondering if those recommendations are going to be added as they come up, because I'm sure they will be making recommendations to council.
Yeah, I don't know if Richard would comment on that, but that's my understanding of it. Okay.
And just a comment on about Memorial for an intersection. That was one of the first changes that was made under the original age-friendly plan, was to actually increase the crossing time for pedestrians there. Bob might be able to add some other commentary about that. There always, unfortunately, may be people that find that even that's a challenge, so it's a tough trade-off between making sure that the majority of people can make it across in time versus extending it to the point where it begins to impact traffic operations.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Weir?
Thank you. This is a nightmare out of my past, if you can remember. But I think we did lengthen it considerably, and I think part of the confusion is that people think that they have to see the walk sign the entire time that they're crossing the crosswalk. The walk sign is intended to tell you when it's safe to leave the curb, and you will have enough time to make the crossing. So you can expect to see it change from walk to don't walk while you are making the crossing, you are in the crosswalk. So there is more than sufficient time. And we went viral with that news story when we lengthened it way back when, because I think everybody was, news media all over the place was looking for things like this. So please don't revisit the length of the crossing.
Ms. Varela, and then back to Ms. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I believe it was at the last meeting or the meeting before that we actually, Council reaffirmed its commitment for, I believe, $50,000, Councillor Harrison's nodding at me, for additional accessibility initiatives in the capital project. So thank you for that.
Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I had another question. There was on page 11, it talked about the eastbound motorists entering Qualicum Beach and a new speed display sign. And I believe we had raised it at some point that the highway sign there encourages anyone going to Parksville to carry on along the beach. And I just wonder if there's any recommendation about this, like how can we convey slow, scenic route ahead, and if you're in a hurry, go around?
Okay, Richard, did you hear the question? Yeah? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I did, and it's a good comment. My experience has been that the people that are driving along Highway 19A right now, that are coming into Qualicum Beach from the west or whatever, driving through town, they're the same people doing it every day. So it's not like they're visitors from somewhere else coming here for the first time. So the way that you get those people to start using Laburnum and Rupert and going around is that complete street approach that I was just talking about, where it becomes a slower street, that then the message becomes after a while, I don't want to do this anymore, it's taking too long, I'll take the faster bypass route. But just signing it isn't going to do it alone. Those are the same people every day, they know what's going on. Putting a sign up that says to Parksville, turn right, won't make a difference for those people.
Thank you. And I know there's people in the gallery who would love to see a forced slow down of traffic because of design, and West Crescent area is notorious for people to speed up and trying to get across as a pedestrian is also taking your life in your own hands. So I think that's the right direction to go. Further questions, Councillor Skipsey?
Okay, I noticed on page 19, the fifth point down on the list is convert the parallel parking on the north side of Highway 19A east of Bay Street to angle parking. And my observation on this is that that area is often used by larger RVs, longer vehicles, and I just wondered if there's been thought about where they're going to park.
Good question. I don't have an answer for you about that. That issue hasn't been raised before, but it is a good point. So let me talk to staff about that. Maybe in the course of converting that to angle parking, it can also be modified to provide some large vehicle parking as well.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Weir?
So two elements related to that issue. One was that when we were first undertaking the redesign of the parking on Highway 19A, we actually had an option that proposed RV parking, and it proved unpopular. So we removed that accommodation, and I don't think we've looked to replacing that anywhere along the waterfront. We have a bit of a problem with overnight parking as well down there. So I think our intention in trying to maximize the amount of parking available down there in this parallel parking area was acknowledging that we were removing some of the parking on the south side of the highway because of the topographical constraints of the slope, and trying to make up for that a little bit by maximizing it on the north side.
That concludes your question, Ms. Skipsey, Councillor Skipsey. Councillor Van Vogt, and then back to Councillor Harrison.
Thank you. On page 14, where you're describing the complete street design, and you've mentioned that Highway 19A was originally designed for speeds at least 10 kilometers per hour higher than the posted speed, so that in reality, Highway 19 through Qualicum Beach is designed for speeds of 60 to 70 kilometers per hour and higher. And so the traffic is responding to this. I'm interested in your design features for the complete street. I would wonder if there's enough room to have the parking, maybe you'd have to have turning room for the parking, but have a barrier and maybe a traffic or a bicycle path that's separated from the road. So I would be interested in knowing the specifics of these designs, and I suppose we'll see that at some point. And also, do you think that this is the most effective way of reducing speed? Would this be more effective, in fact, than lowering the speed limit?
Thank you, Councillor Van der Vogt. Did you hear the question, Richard?
I heard most of it. I think I enough to answer it. Yes, so that is the key thing. The highway was built as the highway up the island, and the goal is to get people up and down as fast as possible. So it's designed for people to drive fast. And so the most effective way of dealing with speeding is to redo the road so it's not designed for people to drive fast. And that's really what is the goal of a complete street design. It's part of the design. It's also to improve safety and to accommodate other types of uses. And one of the uses would be what I've called protected bicycle lanes, but that's sort of what you're talking about, where there's a bicycle lane that's behind a barrier or behind parked cars or in some way protected from traffic along the highway. In fact, that example in my presentation of Bowen Road in Nanaimo has protected bicycle lanes because they're raised up behind the curb, so they're protected from traffic by the curb. So yes, in my experience, putting signs up or having the police go out and enforce the speed limit on a regular basis is not an effective way to discourage speeding long term, and it usually only works with the police when they're there. So those kinds of approaches aren't going to ultimately be successful. If you want to make the street, to slow people down and make the street safer and more inviting for people, redoing the design of the road is the best thing you can do. In other words, you wouldn't build the road as a high-speed highway today. You would build it as a nice, attractive, comfortable road for all types of people, and that's our opportunity to do that with a complete street design.
Thank you, Richard. That was your conclusion. Okay, Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, just to follow up something that Councillor Skipsey said, and I hope I'm not getting ahead of Council here, but the way I see it for the Accessibility Committee, there's essentially three paths, which we haven't really chosen yet. We have chosen to put some money aside, but there's three ways you can allocate the funds. One, retrofit existing things that are not in our transportation plan. So if you have interlocking pavers that are really uneven, it can be very difficult if you're in a walker or wheelchair to go over that because they're uneven and it's a little bit difficult to push along there. Two, put the money into projects that are in our plan to make them more accessible. Or three, have separate projects altogether. It's still early days, so we haven't chosen that, but just highlighting that if folks felt very strongly there was one of those three areas we needed to do more than anything else, by all means let members of council know, and we haven't as a council made a decision on that yet. But just sort of highlighting that's where I can see the funds, one of those three areas, or a mixture of both. All, I guess, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison, and thank you for the work with the Accessibility Committee. So with that, from the gallery, and as I mentioned earlier, when we had the people here for around the airport, I would ask that you would treat everyone respectfully, that to staff and the council and yourselves and your fellow residents, that everybody feels comfortable and confident that they will be heard without any sign of disrespect. So who'd like to start? Todd, go ahead. And then you're next.
There we go. Start again. Qualicum Woods Residents Association would like to thank Council for supporting the review process of the age-friendly transportation plan and the significant amount of work completed by staff on this project and suggestions offered for improving our community safety, many of which we heard of tonight. So thank you. We've also asked Town Council to consider the reduction of speeds on residential streets for improved safety and the well-being of pedestrians, cyclists, and all road users. We supplied the results of canvassing 3 island municipalities who have made or are making changes: Sydney, Campbell River, and Duncan. And for full details, you can see my previous correspondence, which was also provided. We also advise that numerous BC municipalities have already made these changes, which we understand was done as they weren't getting the right signals from the province that the legal change was coming at any time soon. I recently contacted MLA Adam Walker asking if there was any indication the legislative changes were imminent, but he had no such information. As you can see from the examples of other local municipalities, none of them came anywhere close to the upwards of $1 million described during the previous review meeting. A complete signage of every street is estimated to be at the high end of estimates, $100,000 to $150,000. As well, these estimates were for replacing the signs, posts, and concrete bases of every single required sign. But we know there are already existing signs and posts and concrete bases, and there are utility posts, which could be utilized to offset a portion of the expenses. Each municipal employee we spoke to offered many practical examples of how they greatly reduced those costs while they still enacted the speed reductions. And this included utilizing grants received from the ICBC Road Safe and the BC Vision Zero programs. Changes using various degrees of coverage could be accomplished for as low as $2,000 for targeted efforts to a good degree of coverage for approximately $44,000. We believe these costs are a sound investment for a safer community. As Mr. Durdell reported, places like Toronto have seen a 28% reduction in pedestrian motor vehicle collisions and a 67% decrease in major and fatal accidents attributed to a 30-kilometer-per-hour speed limit on local streets. Similar safety improvements in between 30 and 40% in reduction in fatalities and major injuries were seen in other jurisdictions such as London, Wales, and Edinburgh. Again, we believe this is a small price to pay for significant and proven improvement for all our safety. Now, it was felt as if some of the advice was an all-or-nothing approach to costing. But as Mr. Durdell wisely suggested elsewhere in his reply, a more effective approach would be to implement traffic calming measures and other projects in the AFTP to address localized speeding and safety issues. Council also has the option, on a much more affordable basis, to reduce speeds in problematic areas. We would therefore ask Council to implement the residential speed reductions as it has been shown by others that it can be accomplished at a reasonable expense with the will and creative thinking to engage in the project, and it will greatly improve safety and well-being for our residents and visitors. And additionally, I'd like to thank council and staff for the improvements that have already occurred under the plan and that are included in tonight's update for future improvements to the crosswalks on 19A. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Provost. So the question is about the viability and feasibility of changing the speed limit before the province makes that move. Richard, any further comment about how that might work and the costs associated?
Yes, in fact, I put together a short presentation on this. I don't know if you want me to go through it. Take about 5 minutes, but it basically does address the question and what I am recommending as the best approach for you.
Yes, go through it because we've had several emails and questions about that, please.
Okay, so great. So I've got a short presentation here. I assume it's up. I can't see the screen, but basically we're talking about the idea of a municipal-wide 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit. So if we go to the next slide, we go to slide number 2 with the big picture of a maximum 30 sign. So basically the idea is to implement a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit throughout Qualicum Beach on all roads. Typically it's done on all roads that don't have a painted center line. So that's all local streets, some collector roads. It would not include major roads like Highway 19A or Memorial Avenue or Village Way or Laburnum and Rupert, for example. Those would remain the speeds they are. This is just local streets and some collector roads. The idea, and I completely agree, is that a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed is a much safer speed than 50 kilometers an hour if there's a collision, if the number and severity of crashes is reduced. It improves safety for all road users, pedestrians, and cyclists. So nothing wrong with the idea of a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit. The question is it something that the town should be doing right now? So next slide, please. So slide number 3, just some background. Right now, the default speed limit on a municipal road in BC is 50 kilometers an hour. So if you don't see a speed sign, it's 50 kilometers an hour. If you want to have a sign of speed of less than 50 kilometers an hour, you got to put up a sign. You got to put signs on all roads at all intersections in all directions. Now, because of this, the UBCM passed a resolution back in 2019 asking the province to amend the Motor Vehicle Act so that municipalities could put in lower speed limits without having to put up all the signs. The province did reject this, but the province does occasionally amend or update the Motor Vehicle Act. They are looking at some other changes related to micro-mobility devices right now and e-bikes. So it's hopefully that at some point in the future when they make changes for other reasons, they may amend the Motor Vehicle Act to allow the municipalities to do a default 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit without having to put up a bunch of signs, or they might even just say that is the default speed limit now on residential local streets, and it would be taken care of. But that hasn't happened, and that's why the UBCM passed that resolution asking the province to make that change. So next slide. So we're on slide number 4. So what I'm recommending is until the province makes that change, that you leave the speed limits as the way they are right now. You wait for the province to make that change, and instead you put your effort and your money into implementing those priority projects in the age-friendly transportation plan that I talked about. Why am I recommending this? Next slide, please. So we're on slide 5. There's really 2 issues. One is it's expensive. You have to put a sign on every road at every intersection. So I do a couple examples here where there was a couple of small pilot projects done because, of course, they can't afford to do the whole municipality. So in Winnipeg and Vancouver, they just did one small neighborhood, and the cost there was between $8,000 to $10,000 per kilometer for the signs. Well, there's 113 kilometers of road in Qualicum Beach. If we knock out a few kilometers for those major roads that wouldn't be included, we're still looking at least 100 kilometers of road, so we're up to $1 million. Now, maybe you could get lucky and do it for less than that, but you're still probably talking at a minimum, you're looking at $500,000. So it's a lot of money. Now, some municipalities have said, well, we don't need to do that. Why don't we just put up what I call gateway signage? where we put some signs up just on the outskirts of town when you're coming into town that says speed limit on the local streets is 30 kilometers an hour. Well, that approach doesn't comply with the Motor Vehicle Act. You can do that, but the risk in doing that is it's going to cause you problems down the road. And if the Motor Vehicle Act permitted that, then it wouldn't have been necessary for the UBCM to pass a resolution asking the province to change the Motor Vehicle Act. So I don't know why these municipalities are doing that. I don't know the details. All I know is that it's not compliant with the Motor Vehicle Act. It can create issues for enforcement of speed limits. Basically, if someone gets a ticket for driving 50 on a street that's supposed to be 30, but there's no signs there telling them it's 30, they can go to court, get it thrown out, and then suddenly the speed limit is unenforceable throughout town. And it also could raises issues of potential liability. If there's a crash and a contributing factor to the crash was speed, and the person didn't know that the speed limit was 30 because, again, no signs, then there's some potential liability even on the part of the town. So there are issues associated with this approach. It's not something that I would recommend the town do. I know it's not compliant with the Motor Vehicle Act, and it's only going to expose you to risk. So when we're talking about the cost of this, we have to err on the side of caution and assume what the Motor Vehicle Act requires is that you have to put signs on all roads, at all intersections, in all directions. And as the slide shows, that could be up to $1 million. Next slide, please. The other rationale for this is effectiveness. And I touched on this when we were talking about Highway 19A. I've been doing traffic calming work for more than 30 years all throughout BC and Alberta, and one of the biggest problems I've seen is usually before I've gotten involved, the town or the community has tried to deal with a speeding issue by putting up a speed sign, and it doesn't work. So putting up a bunch of 30-kilometer signs all throughout the town, spending that kind of money to do that isn't going to guarantee that people are going to drive any slower. So at the end of the day, there's other ways you can spend that money that would be more effective at achieving reductions in traffic speeds and safety improvements. It's worth also keeping in mind that most roads in Qualicum Beach don't have a safety issue, so even putting up the 30-kilometer-an-hour signs and getting people to drive a little slower might not make a significant difference versus the cost of doing that right now. So again, it comes down to cost and it comes down to effectiveness. So if we can go to the next slide, which is the last slide. In conclusion, not every street has a speeding or safety problem, so rather than using a blanket approach that hits every street, why don't we just target localized speed and safety issues, which is what the age-friendly transportation, or now the community transportation plan does, identifying specific projects and things that can be done to address speeding and safety where we know those are a problem. That is a far better use of your limited funds than spending a bunch of money putting up a bunch of signs throughout the town. So that's, at the end of the day, it's not a bad idea to have a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit. It's just, given the cost to the town and the effectiveness of doing so, there are far better ways for you to spend your funds than doing that.
Thank you. Actually, I have a follow-up question on that, Richard. What if we just put this, and it's just thinking out loud, what if we put the 30-kilometer signs in areas where we do have a problem? There may be some other measures we can take with speed humps or narrowing the road, but would that be effective if we sign the areas that people have identified as problematic, that those areas would have a 30 or 40-kilometer speed sign?
For sure. That's generally what's done. That's why we have school zones and playground zones, for example. And I talked in my previous presentation about First Avenue, which is a 40-kilometer-an-hour playground zone. That 40-kilometer-an-hour sign hasn't made a difference. What we have to do is the traffic calming in conjunction with the sign. So my advice is, if we're going to be putting up signs anywhere on any stretch of road to get people to drive slower, we must look at other things in addition to the signs, because on their own, the signs aren't going to do the job.
Thank you, Richard. The gentleman in the back. Oh. Would you turn the microphone? Oh, it is on. It goes on automatically.
Is it on?
Yeah, it was off, but now it's on. Well done.
Wonderful.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm Jim Dimmick, and I am a resident of Qualicum Beach. I just live off of that famous road, Laburnum. And I'm an avid cyclist and have been forever. So I wanted to, first of all, compliment the town on the progress made in improving and continuing to improve the roads and the trails for cyclists. It really is impressive, and looking at what can be done is equally impressive. I think there still are a couple of troublesome areas. Some of the roads, namely Rupert, heading west from Arbutus, has about a 30-centimeter shoulder, which is completely unsafe. And you might say, well, ride on the small trail on the side, but still, most cyclists take to the road. And the same applies, I think, cycling west on 19A. And I think it's good to see the consultant's attitude and plans for fixing that. My two concerns that I wanted to bring up was is the town and the consultants looking 5-10 years down the road in reference to cycling? Because as you can see now, there's more and more bikes on the road, e-bikes, trikes. I saw 2 e-trikes that just about mowed me down yesterday on a pathway. So I think we have to consider where this is going and what infrastructure changes really are needed, and look significantly in the future. The second one is more relevant now, and it's pleasing to see the consultant talk about etiquette, because we have a lack of etiquette on cyclists and pedestrians on our pathways. It's going to wind up with some medical problems, for sure. And I think a lot of new cyclists are really not in tune with what's necessary to behave properly, to slow down, use your bell or call out. And I've seen in some towns pathways with center lines, with proper etiquette signage that the consultant has referred to. I would encourage the town to look, to raise to a higher priority, looking at the address of etiquette on trails. The problem is now, it's not in the future. If it doesn't change, the problem is going to get a lot worse, and we're going to have some bad accidents. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dimick. Richard?
Yes, I agree. I think trail etiquette is key, pathway etiquette. It also addresses your first concern with respect to e-bikes, and more e-bikes. I think one of the things I'm waiting for to see with the province making changes to the Motor Vehicle Act are regulations that might limit the speed and power of some e-bikes, because today it's a bit of a wild west out there. But certainly trail etiquette and measures to encourage people to share trails properly, all in support of that. We've identified in the age-friendly transportation plan some signage and towards that. One of the other programs that maybe is worth the town considering down the road, or other groups, if they exist, are trail ambassadors that are out at busy times, just encouraging people again to share the pathways safe. That's certainly an approach elsewhere. It's not something that the town might be able to do on an ongoing basis, but if there are seasonal workers that work for the town in the summer, something that could take on doing that for part of their time, that might be something to consider as well.
Richard, Councillor Harrison, and then Councillor Van der Vaart.
I just want to echo what Mr. Dimick just said. That was certainly some of the feedback when we did the in-person consultation on the accessibility plan. Some of the more vulnerable pedestrians highlighted that confusion about who goes where on some of our wider paths was a concern. And I know staff have been putting out some social media posts about that and what proper etiquette is, but it might have to be an ongoing thing. Just to the point earlier about the lowered speed limits, I'm looking at a news article on Czech News, because Saanich was one of those communities that was trying to lower their speed limits. They received a statement from the provincial government, which basically said you already have the ability to change your speed limit through bylaws. And municipalities, I'm just quoting the statement from the provincial government, municipalities can alter speed limits within their communities by passing bylaws and posting signs. Further on, it says, we would need to hear more from municipalities about why a provincial pilot project related to a lower speed would be necessary, given current authority municipalities now have under the Motor Vehicle Act. So I think one of the issue might be that disconnect between the cost of us trialing things versus the regulatory ability. And that might be something where we might want to reach out to the provincial government and say, we understand we have the ability to do this. We don't really have the bankroll to do this. So it might be good for us to reach out to our MLA and see if there's a way we can start getting a little bit of momentum going about this. It did mention the city of Surrey, who did a pilot project. To back up what Mr. Jardul said, they found that it didn't change people's behavior when they changed the speed limit to a lower amount, because obviously they're not doing traffic calming on every single residential street in the city of Surrey. It kind of makes sense. But just to reiterate what he said, that if we're going to lower the speed limit, we'll want to think about it strategically in conjunction with either enforcement or a built environment, because if we just put up the signs, it might not change the driver's behavior ultimately. And last thing, sorry, I see a couple ERA people here, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one thing. Just on the list of projects, Mr. Jardul, one thing I've heard some feedback from citizens in Eagle Crest is about the RDN, when they built Eagle Crest and Chartwell, didn't put in sidewalks, didn't really think about pedestrians respectfully. And we have a lot of folks who like to walk around their neighborhood, particularly on streets like Eagle Crest Drive or Pintail. And we've done some work as a town on Eagle Crest Drive, which really reduced a nasty corner, which was blind because of a tall hedge. It was actually quite dangerous, so kudos to town staff for doing that. But I'm just wondering, are we looking at either Sunrise Road in Chartwell, which is very wide and folks just drive very fast along there? And I hear that a lot from folks in Chartwell when I first ran, or Eagle Crest Drive or Pintail, just for the pedestrian usage of those suburban areas.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Mr. Doduro.
I didn't hear the question entirely, but I think you were basically asking about sidewalks, and the point being is that there are streets without sidewalks, and in some cases people are driving quite quickly. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's about the Eagle Crest area mainly, where the roads are, well, they were designed by the regional district way back, or Ministry of Transportation, and they don't have sidewalks, they don't even have shoulders. And what would be the long-term plan, you think, for improving the safety of pedestrians in that area?
Well, sidewalks aren't cheap, and so what most municipalities do is they say if it's a local street and people want sidewalks, they usually have a local improvement program that funds those. I don't know if you do that in Qualicum Beach, but basically the residents end up paying all or a portion of the cost of sidewalks is put on their property tax bill amortized over a period of 10 years. Otherwise, you'd be spending all your money building sidewalks. You'd never get to build anything else in Qualicum Beach. What I would suggest, though, is if there are some streets where there are safety issues, where it makes it not safe to be walking along the edge of the road, an effective way of dealing with that is to look at some traffic calming measures in those locations, because again, if this traffic motorists are driving at a reasonable speed, then it may not be unsafe any longer to walk along the edge of the road, and the need for a sidewalk, which is a far more expensive option, may be reduced.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I was just going to make a note in terms of, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the gentleman's name. Jim, I know is his first name. Regarding cycling, that the town now has these little booklets, which is Bike Sense, which are available in our lobby upstairs. And I think they're a great addition, because it lays out a lot of, well, how to signal that you're going to turn and basic things. I don't know if there's any program for school children learning how to cycle and what the rules of the road are, and that might be a program that we could look at down the road.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, you've been involved in Eagle Crest for as long as you worked for the town of Qualicum Beach. Any thoughts on how we might make it safer for pedestrians in Eagle Crest area?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. It's not a new request, certainly, and as you pointed out, the design standards that were enforced on the developers are significantly different. I think there's a warning there, though, that, and we did a similar experiment on Qualicum Road, where there was really just a strip of 2 travel lanes and no walking accommodation. The residents there complained about it. We actually repaved the road, widened it, and designated a walking pathway on one side. And it wasn't too much longer after that that we started to get complaints that people were traveling even faster because the road was wider, and it was not calming to have the extra width. So in Eagle Crest, I think you have to consider what are the volumes of traffic, what are the real speeds that they're traveling, not the perceived speeds, but their speeds. Do we really have a problem, like Richard says? I mean, people walking around the neighborhood is in itself a calming element, and I think we would encourage people to respect them and operate their vehicles accordingly. Putting sidewalks everywhere, I don't think is going to make it better. It's certainly going to be expensive, and I think you're going to get complaints that people are traveling faster. So I think we should proceed with caution and start to look at problematic areas like we did. We addressed one that was clearly dangerous, and we made improvements. I think we should proceed with caution with that similar approach.
Thank you, Mr. Weir. Anyone from the gallery? Yes, we've got Susan Lloyd, and then Dave Golson, and then the gentleman in the back. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 3 questions, Richard, that I'd like to ask you about, and all of my comments and my questions relate to the roundabout at Village Way and Country Club. In the last meeting, in the last presentation, I know there were a lot of questions, and one thing that I think it would be best to clarify, because there's been so many issues that have come up over the years and questions about whether this site should be a roundabout or whether it should be a light or some other option. And people are concerned about the cost, because it is a substantial cost for a roundabout. So could you just clarify why a light would not be a recommended solution for this area?
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, so the question, just if I heard it correctly, was why a roundabout, not a traffic signal?
Yes.
And the answer to that is generally roundabouts are much safer than traffic signals. We want, and we did originally in the age-friendly plan look at both options. We ranked them in terms of priorities, and the roundabout came out better. The things the roundabout does that a traffic signal doesn't do is it reduces speeds. So you don't have to worry about people being T-boned in an intersection at high speed. So what you get with roundabouts, if you get a lot fewer crashes, and the crashes you do get tend to be fender benders as opposed to fatalities, which is what you can get at a traffic signal or even at the intersection you have to date. So a roundabout is a much safer configuration. One of the objectives as well is just to reduce speeding along the highway, that stretch of the highway. The roundabout does that. The traffic signal doesn't do that at all.
Okay. Would the cost of a light be substantially cheaper?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. I'm sorry.
Richard, the question is, would a light compared to a roundabout be much cheaper?
The traffic signal would. It really depends on how much you need to reconfigure the intersection, even with a traffic signal. The signal itself might be $500,000, but you might have to spend another $500,000 or $1 million fixing up the intersection to deal with the signal. So you might be, I'm just making these numbers up off the top of my head, but I could see a traffic signal being costing you $1.5 million, maybe even $2 million. I think the roundabout a few years ago was estimated at over $2 million, so it might be a bit more now. But as you can see, either way, you're into much more than $1 million.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, my view is that you've recommended this for 10 years now, that there be a roundabout at that location. And I think we're at the point where we should accept that that is the recommended solution and move towards trying to get that done. Richard, you mentioned in the course of answering that question, you mentioned the speed, and you mentioned the benefit of the roundabout as being a traffic calming measure and a way to reduce speeds. You know, there is a concern, especially when we look at the information you provided on speeds, that, you know, all along that stretch, and particularly when you come into the town at the eastern boundary, you go through where Yambury is, and you continue down to Village Way and Country Club, and then through Milner Gardens, that you get people going at quite a high rate of speed. So just to confirm that your view is that the best way of dealing with speeding along that corridor is to put a roundabout in, changing the road design, and that will be a traffic calming measure for that section of Highway 19A. Is that correct?
Well, the roundabout isn't going to get you. It will slow traffic down, but not all the way back to Yambury. So, one of the comments or the observations that's made about the complete street approach is that the first section from Crescent to Memorial is because the road's going to be repaved. So it's an opportunity. If it's successful, then the town can look at extending that complete street redesign to the west, all the way to Laburnum, and to the east through that section by Country Club and all the way towards Yambury eventually. Now, you may end up doing it in phases, but that same approach can be used elsewhere along Highway 19A. And again, remember, the highway was designed for high speed to get people up and down the island as quickly as possible. We have the opportunity to redesign it for slower speeds, more all types of users, not just motorists, and a safer roadway. So I think ultimately you could look at doing a complete street design on that section of road in addition to a roundabout.
Okay. The last question I have relates to the capital plan. When we look at this report, I'm heartened to see that the roundabout is now, very high up on the priority list. And I would assume that it would make sense for that to be on the capital plan. It's not on the capital plan now, but given the expense of this potential improvement, the need to get funding and partners involved in order to get it done, it would seem to me that it should be on our long-term capital plan. Would you recommend that, Richard?
Well, I think we're beyond my pay grade now. It'll be up to council and staff to figure out. There's always competing interests for funding, and certainly something like the roundabout is going to require grant or cost share funding from other levels of government, just as you did with the roundabout down at Memorial. I think if you could pursue that kind of funding, then you can make the roundabout happen.
Right. The reason I mention it is because in the 2017 age-friendly transportation plan, you did recommend that the roundabouts be included in the capital plan. So it would seem to me now, this is a high priority. It just seems to me be pretty basic that it should be on the capital plan. So I am making that request to council. You won't be surprised by that. When I was at the budget meeting last week, there was a lot of discussion about capital plans, and Mr. Hare made the comment that what's on the capital plan from 2025 onwards, they're planned and will be reviewed as part of the annual strategic planning and budgeting process. The amounts are basically placeholder amounts, and a number of those projects are grant dependent. So, when you're looking at this type of transportation improvement, the need to get this done, the need for funding to come from other sources, it seems to me that you will have perhaps a better chance to get that funding if it is shown as a priority plan, priority project on the capital plan. So I'm requesting that it be added to the transportation capital budget, yes, and that, if it needs to be shown as 90% to be grant funded, 100%, whatever, that's fine, because we all recognize that when you're looking in the future, the numbers are guesses anyways. And perhaps it could be put on the capital plan for 2026, 2027, some money in 2025 in order to look at the conceptual design that was put in place quite some time ago, to just see if it still makes sense and to firm up, the cost estimate. So thank you for the opportunity. And Richard, thank you very much for all of your work.
You got an accommodation for doing all the work, Richard, and passing on the stuff that's beyond your pay grade to council. And I want to thank you, Ms. Lloyd, for articulating the concern. Very well done. Thank you, Mr. Goldson.
Thank you very much for all the work you guys do. Thank you, Richard, for all the work you've been doing. Richard, you spend a lot of time and effort telling us how fast we drive through the town and how many of us drive through the town. Do you do any checks on pedestrians? Not how quickly they walk, but where they move from and to, and the same with cyclists. Is that part of your study as well?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. The sound was breaking up.
Okay, the question is, you do a lot of study and reporting and work on how fast traffic, vehicle traffic and so on is going. Do you spend an equal amount of time or some time on how it works for pedestrians in these areas?
Where are our congested sites and the ones that are really challenging for our pedestrians to get from A to B?
Did you hear that?
Yeah,
Where are the challenges for pedestrians as far as you have observed?
Yes, the challenges for pedestrians are generally in crossing major roads. And that's why we have so many crossings, or not so many, but that's why we have a number of crossings in the age-friendly transportation plan, and they end up being high priority because they have significant safety benefits. So that tends to be the issue for pedestrians, is making those crossings. We didn't count pedestrians. It's difficult to count pedestrians when there's not a good crossing there, because obviously people aren't going to cross when it's not as safe to do it. So we do have, though, the speed data, so we can tell in some locations that there's speeding to contribute to the problem for pedestrians. I don't know if that answers your question.
Not really. What I see that the latest study is concentrated on Highway 19A. All our development is occurring in the center of the core of the town, and I would have thought that, particularly with the new bus garage development and the potential for more pedestrians wanting to get to where the new parking lots are, and the challenges, you'd want to know where the pedestrians are going to come from and where they're going to go to in order to get their daily wares.
Yes, okay. Even though the Highway 19A safety study was kind of the key feature of this update of the age-friendly plan, we did look at all the roads throughout the town. My understanding is that there's going to be some work done regarding the downtown itself, which would include pedestrians, associated with the bus garage development. I don't know if that work is being done by the traffic consultant on the bus garage study right now, or if that's a follow-on. But my understanding is there will be maybe some additional recommendations regarding downtown transportation facilities in association with the bus garage development, and if those aren't being funded by the bus garage development, they could be incorporated into the age-friendly plan.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to turn over to Mr. Weir for some more details. Mr. Weir.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. We did do a preliminary walk around with the consultants working on the bus garage redevelopment, and they certainly did go far afield from the actual subject site and looked at the connections from like all the way down to Harlech. And throughout the municipality, looking at the trip generations that would probably have to be dealt with. So they are certainly awake to the challenges, and I think we will see that as a part of their report coming to council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question, the one that's the big challenge, I guess, is the railroad and lack of its use. How long are we going to wait? Because it's holding a lot of development plans in the town, and I see that you, Richard, you've got some ideas as to how it could be used, best used. How long do we got to wait before we bite the bullet and start spending money and do a good job with being able to get from east to west as a pedestrian or a cyclist?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that question.
Okay.
If you repeat it, or?
Sure. The question is about the railway, and we know that there's probably never, for a long time, it won't be a train on it, because in the news they've decided to tear up the rail, so they won't see any rail traffic soon, and all the folks who see a stop sign crossing the railway feel very awkward because they know they should stop, but they also know there's no train. So you're making a lot of people breaking the law, and I understand why that is. So the question is, how long do we wait before we can actually say, okay, it's no longer an active railway, and we can do the things that staff has mentioned earlier?
That's a good question. I've actually asked staff about that because my understanding of the Act is that you may not need those stop signs, so it's being investigated. It's not included as part of the age-friendly plan because it's one of those operational things that could be done independently of the plan. But I agree. I mean, having the stop signs there is not a desirable situation, and if it's possible to remove them under the current regulations, then that would be the preferred solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, any further thoughts on that? I know you've been trying to figure out what to do, and especially with the intersection on First and Memorial.
Yes, it's not an easy question to answer. It certainly lies with other levels of government to resolve. I think we are hopeful that the recent developments in Nanuus would trigger some action, and the province has certainly set aside some money to study it. However, we have no idea when that's going to happen, and I don't think it's certainly going to not be resolved before I retire.
Okay.
Well, I'm with the Probus Group, and we've got a presentation by a director of the ENN on Tuesday next, so it'll be interesting. Maybe we can twist a few arms and see if he thinks there's a brighter future for it. Thank you.
The gentleman in the back.
This is a follow-up for the railway. Thank you, consultant, for including his section 3.2 about the projects which are affected by the active railway. I just want to note that the study which is going on right now is meant to be completed by February of 2025. That does give about a year of study of the future of the railway. But since I'm a trail advocate, part of the Friends of Rails to Trails Vancouver Island, I would suggest that the council makes themselves well heard about the opportunities we have here and the costs. It's noted $250,000 at the Memorial and First Avenue. Traffic signal would be incurred if the railway, for some reason, were to be deemed to continue to be active. But I guess I look forward to seeing it become a trail because there's also opportunities east and west of town to have a seamless trail to Parksville as well as north to, west to Dashwood. I guess that my question is about the stop signs. I grew up in Chilliwack, and many years ago I actually failed my driver's test because there was a yield sign at the Southern Railway crossing. It was not a stop, and I stopped, and I failed. So I just have to note that I think there is light and a partial solution until we get rid of that railway, that maybe a yield sign could be put up, because that was the case in Chilliwack. And that may have been quite a few years ago, Airport Road and the railway, Southern Rail. But yes, it's a slow-speed rail. We don't have any trains. And perhaps the town could even request a slowing of the speed of the phantom trains. Because quite honestly, I guess my question would be, one, could it become a yield sign? And one, how much of an effect does a missigned stop sign affect people's respect for other stop signs? Because when I observe, when I walk down the Arbutus Trail, when I walk along the First Memorial Trail, the downtown trail, I see about probably a third of the people don't stop at all. about a third slow down, but don't come to a complete stop, and about a third do stop. But I do see it as a safety issue for pedestrians. So if the drivers are made to respect the current signs, how much of an effect do you think would perhaps would there be more respect of the current signage? So that's my question, but I also would like to highlight those studies. The council could potentially, and I do thank council, and I also thank the consultant about putting this in the report. Thank council also for forwarding the message in November to the regional district in Nanaimo, because the regional district is actually responsible for the railway, because the regional district actually owns it, together with the First Nations. So the town could say, look, this is the cost that we'd be incurring. And part of the study, you could say, well, this would be the cost to our active transportation because we're not able to move forward and we're dilly-dallying right now. We got to have a decision. And actually, I think that's a political decision. But if there could be movement on that, it's the regional district. The regional district has a consultant for doing the study. There's $18 million being set aside for this study, and that's where it's at. The money's there. So
yes, it's an enigma. Thank you for raising this issue. I'm not sure if you heard all of the comments about this, Richard, but I'm going to turn it over to our own staff first and just talk about what the chances are changing the signs from stop to yield, and if that, in your opinion, if that would make a difference.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. As Mr. Dudoul pointed out, he has brought the issue to us. We are exploring it through whatever channels we can get answers from. They're not always quickly forthcoming, but we will certainly look at this one because it may be a good solution for us for the interim.
As I agree with the gentleman's comments that when you disobey or you feel like you're disobeying, and most people don't even come to so you don't need to slow down for the stop signs. The next stop sign is on Arbutus and First. Well, I didn't obey that one, so it becomes a habit. Well, we just cruise through, and that is an issue. So I think this is a dangerous situation where if we know there's not going to be a train and you still make people to stop, it's annoying, and I think it creates some kind of frustration with having stop signs. So I think it needs to be addressed. So thank you for drawing our attention to that, sir. And I'm looking forward to hear the report from was that you, Dave, that said the probers are going to have a presentation by the current manager of the railway?
Well, he's the director of the foundation.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Just to point out as well, a few months prior, Mr. Johns held a meeting in the Parksville Civic Center for a lot of folks, talking about a national trail network and how it ends at Nanaimo and what it would take to extend that into Oceanside, because there is actually a significant generator of tourism revenue, as well as being something that promotes more physical activity, which makes people healthier, which means ideally we have fewer doctor's appointments because we're a little bit healthier as a community. So it is something I think there's a lot of support. And I think another thing which we need to start talking about is that the current state of the railway, you have trestle bridges which are really, really not been maintained for over a decade. The rail line, in my first term, there was a bottle drive the Qualicum Nation was doing up by the recycling depot in Parksville. There's a little kid who went by the rail line and started digging up all the rail, digging up everything for the rail line because he thought it was a fun little souvenir, just by hand. And that's like a 6-year-old, so that gives you an idea of the state of the rail line. And I think there's a serious conversation of, is this going to be like a safety hazard for citizens? We just leave it here, sitting here, especially the bridges. Someone walks along it thinking it's safe, and then it's rotten and something collapses. So I do think, as well as, I know the province wants to sit on this decision as long as possible, because no matter what you do, you're going to make someone really angry. But we do have to consider, both in the town of Qualicum Beach and the rural areas like in French Creek, there's a bridge in French Creek, really close to town, that might be unsafe in the near future. And we should have this real conversation of, if it becomes a safety issue so significant, why is it physically there? And also, too, just the last point, I mentioned it when we first talked about this 7 months ago, I think. The court ruling for the BC Court of Appeal, which just forced the provincial and federal government's hand to give the land back to the News Nation. In the ruling, the judge said essentially, and you should really read the ruling and not quote me on this, but basically said because you wish it to be a rail line doesn't make it an active rail line. And he was hinting that it was more the actual use of the rail line which made it an active rail line. So I'd suggest if your folks are really keen on that, the ruling's public, and look through the ruling, particularly someone who has a legal background, and the words are there, and don't quote me, please.
Thank you. With that, I think we can slowly bring this to a close. I got to draw attention from all of you here that our staff, and they're not complaining, but they've been here since 8:30. So they're looking at a 12-hour day, and I really appreciate the willingness to have these meetings for all of our benefit and for council to help make better decisions. So how many hands, how many people would still like to speak? Okay, Mr. Wood, you're the last one. You have the last word in a way.
I'm a W. I'm used to being the last one. I just wanted to echo, well, first of all, I wanted to thank Richard immensely for all of the work that went into this. Your report is thorough, comprehensive, professional, and very, very well done, and thank you for that. I just wanted to emphasize what Susan Lloyd had said. Richard's project listing shows the roundabout as the number 3 priority when you read down the list. And if you take out the defunct railroad, it becomes a number 2 project. The capital projects plan, starting at least back in 2015, showed the roundabout on the capital plan. It showed it every year. It showed it as starting 2 years out. And the next year would start 2 years out. Next year would start 2 years out. And somewhere around 2021, there was a direction from council that was, I believe it was unfortunately called Package 13 of the funding at that particular time, that it not be funded for this year. And when the capital projects plan financial listing, or the numbers listing, came out, that had been taken off for this current year and for all future years. So it had disappeared, had disappeared off the face of the earth. And I think Susan made a very good point that if we're going to be serious about putting this roundabout in, it contributes to traffic calming. It contributes immensely to intersection safety, and it's something that I don't know how long a certain former, now current mayor has been promising Eagle Crest they're going to get their roundabout, but it's a long, long time. Thank you.
I can only promise what I think council will support. I've been quoted in the newspaper saying that I support it, but I'm not a premier who can say what I say is the law. I have to get at least 2 more members of council to agree. We're very democratic to deal with these issues. So council has heard your comments, and Ms. Lloyd, thank you also for articulating that so well, very eloquent, and Mr. Wood, thank you as well. So we'll look at when we deal with with our strategic plan, and then following up and align that with our financial plan. We'll seriously take a look at that. Thank you. So with that, council, there's a resolution. We're going to have a couple of resolutions, but that's one that's on the screen, so we'll deal with that one first. If council would like to make that as a motion, we can recommend that to council. Councilor Harrison?
Sure. I would want to make a brief little amendment, but just to get the ball rolling on that. Move the staff recommendation.
Anybody? Councilor Van der Valk seconding? Go ahead.
And I was just suggesting that we might want to, as well, write a letter to the province indicating that the cost of signage is an impediment to the town using its existing authority by bylaw to change speed limits. And so we defer it for now until they change it. And in the meantime, the province has already said in a public statement, why do you guys not do it already? Well, the reason is we don't have the money. So I think it might be useful just to send a letter as well to the Minister of Transportation.
Okay, I think we'll have a separate motion to make that correspondence. Okay. Councilor Skipsey? So we'll just deal with the resolution as printed. Thank you.
Yes, I'm okay with the resolution as printed as long as we make a follow-up. I had drafted a recommendation to put forward to write a letter to the province. So.
Okay, well, you're in together on that one. Okay, discussion on the resolution on the board. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carries. And then could we have the other resolutions regarding the age-friendly transportation plan? I think they're in your... Okay, there they are, the two on the age-friendly plan. There's two recommendations. So we could take them separately, but I think they're quite appropriate to take them in one. If I could have a motion to that effect. Councillor Vandervalk, Councillor Skipsey, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Well, staff, well done. I think we're almost done. Go ahead.
Well, I would like to make a motion that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that a letter be sent to the province requesting a change to the Motor Vehicle Act to provide provisions for local governments to implement a blanket 30-kilometer speed zone in residential areas and provide reasons why this is necessary.
Yes, thank you. And Councillor Harrison made a good comment about explaining the cost of doing what they said we think we can do. So is that, does that sound okay with you?
I'd second it. I mean, personally, I prefer 40. So we might just want to say reduce the speed limit, and staff will maybe tell us which of the two they recommend. But the point is the same.
Yeah. So would you mind reading that out with that amendment when you're ready, Councillor Skipsey?
So that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that a letter be sent to the province requesting a change to the Motor Vehicle Act to provide provisions for local governments to implement a blanket speed reduction in residential areas and provide reasons why this is necessary.
All right. Did you get all that, Ms. Skipsey or Mr. Gold? Yeah. Councillor Harrison. You Councillor second that discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Anything else? Well, I've never done this before like this, but I think I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our staff for the wonderful job that they're doing. And thank you for staying with us as well. Have a good evening until next time. A motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Druhl, too.
And Mr. Druhl, you're in the thank you note too. Okay. Councillor Vandervalk made a motion to adjourn, seconded by Councillor Harrison. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.